All right, so tonight's guest is a researcher. His name's Jeremy Reese. Jeremy, how are you doing tonight? Thanks for showing up and wading through that clip of you and Richard talking. I appreciate it. You were here early too, so I felt bad, but I wanted to have that clip playing in context for the audience. How you doing?
Great, Richard. Thanks for having me on. And it reminds me why I tend to pre-record and edit things down. There's a lot of ahs and ums.
Yeah, and there was also a little bit of speculation in the part that we actually played, and I wanted to let the audience know that everything that came before that was like well-researched, footnoted, these sort of things. So shame on me for not picking the clip more carefully. We did it kind of in the 5 minutes of pre-show, but I appreciate you making time. And yeah, where would you like to start? You have the floor. You can talk about what you talked about with Richard Gage. That was fantastic content. If you want to talk about how you got started in this and like what questions you first asked and what evidence you just found and like kind of follow the trail of evidence, but it's up to you. I wanted to make sure that you had a good platform to express yourself and get the word out.
Yeah, I mean, I was just trying to research anything I could about, who was inside those buildings that could have had access. Cause I got kind of beyond the stage of realizing that it was a controlled demolition and, the whole back and forth arguing with people about the physics of the collapse and the smoke clouds and the molten steel and all that stuff. And you realize that there's a lot of layers to this that you have to unwrap for a lot of people, because everyone learns 9/11 the wrong way, it seems. And even the debunking is designed to kind of wrap layers around the core of this. Even when you start diving into the research, there's so much infighting and arguments that can draw people away from kind of this core stuff, and it's easy to get sidetracked and distracted with a lot of the stuff that's out there. But I think that in going after this core group of suspects and reminding people just exactly who Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld and L. Paul Bremer were, and how far back they go into the depth and the heart of this whole, deep state, this entity we call the deep state or the New World Order, or the Illuminati or whatever. There's all these words for it. But if you want to look at who's been at the core of this military industrial banking intelligence complex, that's what I like to call it. Really, you could add a couple other terms in there, banking intelligence, surveillance complex as well, because they've wrapped a lot of different heads to this hydra.
Yeah, the people control dudes.
Yeah,
right. They're about total full spectrum dominance,
technocracy, transhumanism, cybernetic. I mean, it's
they them those who want to take away our freedom.
Yeah, and it's kind of crazy how they're so in the open, but also in the shadows as well with their connections. And Henry Kissinger comes up a lot in this. Of course, a lot of people don't know that Henry Kissinger was actually originally appointed to head the 9/11 Commission until it drew a lot of attention. And
Bremer
he stepped
worked
down
for Kissinger Associates. If memory serves, I just looked in Dope Inc., which talks about the East India Company being transitioned to Kissinger Associates. So I looked in there in the index for Bremer. He's not in there. But Bremer, I'm pretty sure he did time at Kissinger Associates, which is another connection in addition to these other. So they wanted to put Kissinger in charge of the commission. People recognize that right away. And it's not that Bremer got in charge of the commission, but he got other key roles.
He's a partner. He's a partner with Kissinger Associates. You're right.
Yeah, he was like his position at Marsh. One of his positions was like CEO of risk management.
Yeah, that the whole risk crisis. So there's a number who worked with or were associated with Henry Kissinger, including Brent Scowcroft, Lawrence Eagleburger, Joseph Kasputis, who was actually head of Baseline Financial, which is where the plane impacted the South Tower.
And then you had like George Shultz, but so I agree with Scowcroft because he on the morning of 9/11 he was in an E-4B doomsday plane on the tarmac when World Trade Center 1 got attacked. Apparently, like that's the official story somewhere. I got his book and I got the 9/11 Commission report here. I looked up in here Bremer because I'm like, of course he's in the 9/11 Commission report, right? but I was like, have I ever looked it up? So let me show you what I found. Here's the official. Like, this is the official story. I got a couple of these, just in case one got edited. I got like the paperback, I got the hardcover. Here's this part about Bremer, and let me give you a little context, because he's only mentioned once. I was surprised. He's only mentioned once in this whole book. It's under the realm of counterterrorism, talking about the 1960s and 70s State Department. Then you go down here to Zbigniew Brzezinski,
cyclone nonsense,
George Shultz, Cap Weinberger, and then right here on the next page, it picks up through those Shultz elevated the status and visibility of counterterrorism by appointing as its first coordinator L. Paul Bremer and then Robert Oakley, both senior career ambassadors of high standing in the Foreign Service. The department continued to be dominated by regional bureaus for which terrorism was not a first order concern. Then it goes on to talk about more warmongers, mentioning bin Laden.
So it just mentions him in passing, sort of thing.
Yes.
Yeah, that's weird.
Yes.
That's weird. Does it mention Jerome Hauer at all?
Oh, let me look.
For Kroll Associates.
This should be a good game. We should make like a 9/11 board game. Hauer.
Because Hauer is, he was sort of the go-to guy. It's interesting that Bremer was on early on, one of the first ones to was Advance that mentioned Osama bin Laden. And he sort of like backs it up and says something about the World Trade Center 1, which that had been long debunked, I thought, in regards to Ramsey. You said exactly what you were saying, Jeremy.
Hauer. I thought it was Hauer.
Hauer? Hauer is how you spell it.
Yeah, I thought so, but I don't see that here.
Unless I'm also...
All right, yeah, we're getting sidetracked. The point was there was only one reference to L. Paul Bremer in the official report. And
Hauer. Yeah, that's weird.
Yes, definitely did not dive enough into these names and characters in their investigation. I think that
almost like they had a predetermined narrative created by Philip Zelikow, who used to work with the National Security Council people that did it.
Almost or John Lemon, who was an associate of Henry Kissinger and a 9/11 commissioner, and James Thompson, also a 9/11 commissioner associated with Kissinger. So,
well, I seemed when I looked at the 9/11 commission, like I remember there's a dude from the New School for Social Research, and that's like a communist kind of outlet here. And then there's some people from the Tower Commission, like good old days of Iran-Contra, BCCI fame. Right. So it's like a who's who have covered up the last big thing. And I didn't really, I had hope. Like I remember when they came out with this report, it was like July 22nd, 2004, maybe something like that. It was a long time after 9/11. They waited 441 days to start that investigation. What? I mean, if you're looking for criminals putting off the investigation, look no further than 9/11. But people aren't allowed to know these things. So you've done a good job, in my opinion, over the years of avoiding the red herrings and sticking to who's who do they work for, what's their background, follow the money. And also, like this part about interchar, I didn't know that about Bremer until like I had come across your research in one of your other presentations, right? But my theory was, before I knew about interchar, when I asked the question, like, how could they do the things that, like, there are things that produce the effects we saw on 9/11, but there's layers of them. So how did they do this part where they might have applied some sort of thermite to the construction? Well, there's construction opportunities, these upgrades, these renovations, these sort of things. But the way I pictured it was when I saw the movie, The Italian Job, and Ed Norton's character goes in there and paints that rectangle, and then they blow exactly that rectangle and it cuts right through the concrete and the safe drops down, and then they get it out of the water, and that's like the beginning of the movie. I was like, they could paint it on. Like the painters don't know what kind of thing they're applying. And then when you find out they did new spray on fireproofing, it's like, So,
well, the Hindenburg, I didn't realize that technology had been around. I mean, obviously the nanotechnology.
Yeah, it wasn't nano-thermite.
No, I know the nano
it was a
came
thermite
later,
reaction,
which is fascinating. Right, that to me was fascinating.
Yeah. I'm sure there's even more if we could really dig through the literature going back and stuff. It was funny because when Jim Meigs of Popular Mechanics was on debating this with the creators of Loose Change on Amy Goodman. Back in the day, they had claimed that thermite couldn't. It was ridiculous. It wasn't a military weapon. We actually found it in the in the Explosives for Sabotage handbook. I found it in several, Army reference manuals for explosives. So proved that it's used by the military. It's in the manuals, and then we proved that it was also used to sever vertical steel columns with an article that one of our researchers found in an old issue of Popular Mechanics, where they demolished the Skyride Tower in Chicago using thermite to melt the legs. And so, like, everything that they said was wrong. And but yet they're still they still every year it gets put out like, Popular Mechanics,
they got it, they got the answer, don't need to think for yourself, man. Why are you even thinking about it?
Yeah, so it's pretty, I don't know, there's a lot of interesting stuff in the history of nano-thermite, but with nano-thermite was being developed by at Los Alamos Labs, and the director of security apparently at Los Alamos at the time, just in that division, was the same company that ran security at the World Trade Center, that Securicom Stratosec.
Right.
So they found the contracts for Los Alamos, and someone traced it down. I'd like to really see that all that research hashed out. I've had a number of people reach out to me and even send me more documents on different stuff since I was on Richard Gage, because I guess more people know about, or you get people coming out of the woodwork that say, I've been sitting on this for 20 years and who do I share it with? And then they see that I'm doing the research, so they send it off to me. And
did you talk about the galvanized pipe the other day in the World Trade Center, about they had to replace pipes or something like
old
that?
Galvanized pipes in the World Trade
Because
Center?
I had someone contact me about that, but then I heard someone, it was either you or Aiden Monahan, because I listened to that right afterwards because you said to listen to it, so I did. One of you guys mentioned
it was him. Yeah,
someone who came to him and was saying that thing, and I was like, I had someone contact me 15 years ago, and she's like, my dad helped to build it, and he used to come home and complain like that they didn't make any sense, like the buildings weren't being built to last, that they're putting this galvanized pipe and enclosing it in concrete, and when it fails, you're gonna have to dig up the floor, like on every floor. And it was like a crazy thing. But if you look at it as those buildings were built to be stage props to do exactly what they did and trigger their family's legacy, because it's like Nelson and David were the names of the rock, like they were the names of the towers, the nicknames of the towers, right?
Wow.
Those internationalists, I'm just
saying, they cut corners.
Well,
well, galvanized pipe cost actually more, so they probably used just cast iron, and which encased in concrete will rust and corrode in a couple of years. They would have had to use galvanized.
And that's an old type of thing. When were the trade centers built? By then they would have 70s. Yeah, by then, like, that's something that was like 1920s style architecture.
And then the other thing that didn't make sense
was
was
my parents lived in, for God's sakes, a big old stone house. Like, they would not use that in the 70s and for a building that would want to last for a long, old cast iron. The casting, like the polymerized casting over time wear away, and it just like a steel cast iron pan would just start rusting. Like,
there's
that's
a couple
crazy.
other interesting problems. So like, if I were to talk about it, I would look at the pre-existing problems. Like, what was going on at the World Trade Center in a couple years right before this happened? They were being downgraded. The rental space was downgraded from like an A to a C. So like
that's interesting. I didn't know that.
Because of the lack of modernization and lack of internet, and you couldn't use a cell phone really in the building because the building's casing was like a big Faraday cage basically. So it was hard time using the cell phone up there. Or I worked up high. It could have been you're up too high to get a good signal, but it was notorious that you can't use your cell phone in the building, even to call someone else who's in the building.
Interesting.
So you'd have to grab a desk phone and do that. And then why would they be doing these upgrades in these select areas in buildings that it didn't economically make sense to keep them in service anymore? And then the question comes, how do you take these buildings down economically? What's the insurance risk to take down these huge towers? And then I thought, well, they had to ask that before they got the permit to build these things in the first place. So maybe in the permit, there's some, how are you going to take this down? Maybe they're like, we have a way to deverticalize it later on command, just like they do to embassies, right? They can have it set up in the construction to do the thing that we observe that day.
I see. Yeah.
Right. So there's a whole bunch of, and then there's the insurance policies prior to that, and the Silverstein, and then the tenants of
the Silverstein, but that was that whole connection.
So much interesting
what he
history
built afterwards
in any of those
towers.
areas.
I have a quick question for Jeremy though. Like, you said something very wise to me earlier on. Like, it's a lot of people start with the how the buildings possibly came down, gets into a lot of ad ignorantium fallacies, possibilities, but we're not quite sure. But you had the wisdom to see through that and say, no, we need to get more to the who, what, when, and where before, and then the logic of those connections before we even get to the how. So
you need the who, what, when, and where to get to the why, then to understand the how.
That'll all lead you to how it was done. But for you to, and I know you have a background in physics. I remember your moniker as Alien Scientist back in the day. I used to love your videos and watch them all the time.
You don't watch them anymore, Tony?
I haven't. Well, it's been they called me out. It's been a while. Not that
I'm still at it, man. I'm still doing it with the Alien Scientist, man. That's where we got to go in the future. Because that's like the 100%. Big solution, man. Is there's technology that the government's not just been hiding this stuff; they've been hiding a heck of a lot more, and the technology that they have under their belts out there. Again, when you start understanding who really runs the world, who really runs the show, you look into companies like Battelle, and I started researching Battelle. It led me to all the like who could have developed the nano-thermite. I started metallurgy contractors. Battelle comes up right away. And when you realize that Battelle's been around since before the Manhattan Project, they essentially own. They don't essentially. They own every single national laboratory in the United States. Literally all of our science is managed by Battelle. In the entire United States. You can look this up. They have the contracts for every single national laboratory. Then you realize that every single national laboratory in the country has these patent holding companies where basically they'll scoop up the patents and hold them and shelve them and pay off the scientists who invent these sorts of things. Basically anything that would be a threat to the powers that be, which is the gold, oil, and drugs that run gods. The gods is basically gets bought out and shelved. And then there's actual physical systems and mechanisms in place within the scientific realm to do this. And that's what a lot of people in the scientific community don't realize. They think like, oh, well, I could just become a scientist and go and invent like the next life-saving, energy technology.
That's and car that runs on water.
Yeah,
right?
That's not cases. The case. It's not the case. I'm sorry. Like, it's not how it works.
No, you're exactly right. It's knowledge filtration systems to these review boards and these journal reviews and all this sort of nonsense. Plus, most of it's done through actually, most are competing for government grants nowadays. But even when it was private funding back in the early 20th century and the 19th century, still a lot of it, if they couldn't support the infrastructure already in place in order to make more money in some capacity or to precipitate or continue what's going on in regards to how the way we distribute electricity. I'm thinking of Morgan and the whole battle with Tesla and Edison and all that sort of nonsense. But to me, you provided a theoretical foundation for making sense how these technologies actually could possibly be developed, and could here are the theoretical foundations around actually creating technologies that are gravity shielding, things that really would be sort of a whole different way of viewing physics, understanding the nature of physics. And I was really into that earlier on, because I'm like, well, if this is true, and a lot of my research led there as well, and I'm talking going back 10, 15 years ago when I sort of had my own awakening, then there has to be at least some sort of theoretical foundation that it can be grounded in some sort of scientific understanding that would make this possible. I don't want to hear some sort of because there's so many, when you get into this research, there's so many different, let's just call them sort of bad actors, or just people that are just not heavy within the physics and they're interested in the sort of what ifs and the imaginative aspect of it, or just there's a lot of weird theories out there, and a lot of people would go down a lot of strange rabbit holes. So to me, grounded in a sort of physics that
you got to be able to entertain weird theories in order to get to what the actual
but you have to make sure you can ground it in logic. And that's what that's what was really powerful about your work, Jeremy, because you really grounded it in logic for me to help bring it back to sort of a material reality. And this is how it could manifest this way. So,
and by logic, you mean starting with evidence that exists
and deducing from first principles.
Right.
It's very simple.
But that's what we were going. Well, that's what I did with all the electronics and photonics. I mean, I was talking, one of the first people talking about using optoelectronics and the future of how everything would be run with and indeed the quantum computers, they're now realizing that we can't build quantum computers without this technology, without the optoelectronic technology. It's just not possible. So it's good to be coming full circle now with a lot of this as it's emerging, and people are like, oh, people have been talking about this for 20 years now. Where is it? It's like, well, here it is. It took 20 years to get here, and it might take another 20 to get where we really need to go with it. But I think that lowering our power down is a big part of this. Realizing that we're really wasting a ton of energy with the way that we have all of our infrastructure currently set up, including the gasoline engines and cars and everything. And then that's going to be a challenge in and of itself, because we're trying to switch over to electric, but then the cost of lithium's going through the roof, and we don't have enough of
how many lithium deposits. I mean, it just becomes
we don't have the infrastructure to completely replace fossil fuels yet, and we're at a bit of a
we could allocate land, grow hemp, make alcohol gas. You could have an engine runs on alcohol. You don't want to grow hemp, you can buy it from the town hemp agora.
Corn.
And if you grow it,
corn works great too.
Yeah, corn works great, but hemp's more efficient at it. There's a book by David Bloom, Alcohol Can Be a Gas, and then you put that together with Jack Harer's The Emperor of Hemp, or The Emperor Wears No Clothes book. Boom. We got that solved. Don't have to worry about the Saudis.
There's actually a bunch of different biofuels lately beyond hemp that are, from my understanding, with new technology, would make it pretty much just.
But we want low tech. Like, remember back in the times of Gandhi, when he wanted to protest the British Empire, they started making homespun clothing. So for them, freedom was a loom where they could make their own cotton, so they didn't have to depend on British textiles. Today, instead of textiles, it's petroleum, British petroleum. And to get free of that, we could grow hemp, we could process it in alcohol, we could pump that could be like freedom.
I'm just saying you could do that with a lot of different bio, but it doesn't have to be hemp. I'm just saying that the technology's evolved to the point where you can use a lot of different weeds and grasses and sort of field crops such as that. But cover
something crops that can be grown.
The laws haven't evolved.
Exactly. Why is it illegal in the first place? Let's go back to history. JP Morgan and DuPont wanted monopoly money, and they got it still.
But back to my original. So it's great to finally meet you, and really appreciate your work throughout all the years you've been doing it. 15 plus years now? I think I discovered you like 10 years ago. But what sort of made you transition, obviously not away from the possibilities of how the towers could have been brought down, the materials used, controlled demolition, different types of explosive materials, but to transition to the people that might have been the connections, let's say, the individuals that maybe have some sort of connection to the Trade Center in some fashion. Like what made you transition from the echo chamber of 1,000 different opinions fighting back and forth on how it was done, and ignoring the financial connections, ignoring the political connections, ignoring the corporate connections? What was that? Well,
I think it was right around, when all the thermite evidence started coming out with Stephen Jones and Kevin Ryan, and a lot of these guys who were investigating that they
2006-ish.
2006, 2007, all like a lot of those papers started coming out, and we started looking into the thermite stuff. And that's when I was like, I know there's something more down this rabbit hole with the thermite connections and stuff. So I kept digging down that hole. But at the same time, we saw that whole wave come out of these alternate theories of how the towers were brought down. And the whole there was this whole theory of using the Hutchinson effect, which I was familiar with and interested in. And there's a whole bunch of videos talking about how that some of these more exotic
high
physics,
voltage, situations,
directed energy weapons and stuff like that could have been used to vaporize the towers or other more unconventional methods. So I of course become entangled with that, because it's more science to kind of dig more stuff to dig down. But what you realize,
there's layers to it too, because it's like, it seems laughable, but there is footage where a girder appears to just vaporize. It doesn't, as it's falling, it just disappears. It's steel,
and there's cars that are half rusted, and there's materials that have gone through like perfectly gone through other perfectly like
my
cemented.
point has always been,
It's
because
very strange. It is.
I had a
very
client that
strange.
worked there. Each floor in the World Trade Center is 1 square acre. So
Yeah.
that's 1 square
Wow,
acre of
Jesus.
concrete and rebar under our feet, because it's all open floor plan supported by the interior columns and the exterior columns, right? So there's all that's there. And for 220 square acres of concrete to vaporize, pulverize, turn into dust, I don't know what kind of energy it takes to do that, but it's more than comes from jet fuel in any equation I could figure out with physics.
That's true.
So, but the thing is, like you mentioned,
vibrational structure,
people think that
molecular dissociation. There's something else there, unless thermite accounts for it somehow.
Oh, I was
explosive,
totally into that early on,
Yeah.
just from my research into alternative potential energy solutions to Jeremy's. Wait, go ahead, Jeremy. I'm sorry.
Right. The whole thing with molecular dissociation, if it was steel and you're using directed energy or microwaves, it's going to, it's going to spark. It's going to sparkle pretty brightly, just like the argument that they used against the thermite said, the whole thing would have lit up like a sparkler on the 4th of July. So it couldn't have been thermite. Well, the same thing would have happened if you put directed energy weapon on the metal, especially the aluminum facade on the outside of the building. Like you mentioned, it acts like a Faraday cage. Well, how did they penetrate to the core, columns in the building if it was directed energy weapons? And you come up with all these really scientific ways of asking the questions and looking at it, and then where did the energy come from to do it? If that, it's much easier to store that energy in chemical form, right, inside devices that are pre-planted within the buildings. And why are they all this effort to look at a hurricane that was 100 miles off the coast? And it just seems like distractions from what we should be looking into, which
but without that hurricane, you would have had a cloudy, overcast maybe day, and that hurricane sucked all the clouds and all the smoke that day out of the set. So from the camera and all the cameras were looking south pretty much that day. And as the set design, the wind blows all the smoke left all day, which is going
strong
east,
wind
technically,
too,
right? So it's something that you can continue to look at and analyze and look and see what are those angles. It's not just that there was a hurricane there. There's a whole naval armada out there just off the coast of Long Island when this is all going down. And then you see some Navy helicopters maybe flying around the Trade Center while it's on fire. There's a whole bunch of stuff.
Wait, I didn't know the Naval Armada. Is that part of that's not part of the NORAD?
It was Hurricane Aaron. Yeah. So the whole thing is there's a whole bunch of facts.
That's the Woods angle. But to Jeremy's point, how do you penetrate like a Faraday cage? And then there would be some sort of friction with the waves, with the material.
I know about planning and picking the date of September 11th for esoteric and other reasons, but
it's the birthday
creating a hurricane. They created a hurricane too. I mean, it's maybe it was
a
lot.
I don't know that anyone
lucky happenstance, but
I'm sure people did claim that they created the hurricane. I just think it's that's.
They created the hurricane and then stored the energy in that, and then they sucked the enery out of it to demolish the buildings later.
Is there a cartoon of that one? That would be pretty good.
No, this is some out there, but and
it's some logical cartoon.
You got to look at these things logically, and I'm still like, we still got a bunch of Hutchinson guys that we talk to and bring in every once in a while to try to show where they're at with that technology. No one's really there vaporizing steel towers yet with it, but I'm still open to anyone that can show me an example of how to do this. So I try to be open-minded and scientific
to the science that exists. That's what is that your limit? Is that your line in the sand? Like things that either exist or we have, evidence that they've been researching in this area and it could exist because they've been pouring money in, we can't see. So it's like up to the line where we can see, plus a little bit further because we know there's a lot of top secret stuff that they're doing.
That they're 20 years ahead of whatever they're telling us out here in the public.
At least, I once heard a Lockheed Martin say those 75 years. That was going back about 12 years ago. They were saying
they might have had some
more
stuff.
Military technology, whatever is in the consumer level, is they're 75 years advanced in the military level. At least that was his claim. It was some managing director at Lockheed Martin.
Is that because they got a time capsule package from Lockheed Martin 75 years in the future? Is that how they got ahead in the first place? I mean, you guys are like this close to talking Philadelphia experiment with that whole hurricane and
That's the
very
whole
good.
that
Roswell
brings in
thing, like
ether, yeah.
We might have got something. I don't think it was made by Lockheed Martin, but we might have gotten a window into something much more advanced in the future.
That'd be like an ether physics sort of thing.
All of a sudden we had
Like
the
field
silicon
physics,
chips and all sorts of technological advances right after 1947. CIA, all sorts of stuff.
Well,
National
he had
Security Act.
John Trump. What was it?
John G. Trump took over
John G.
Tesla's
Trump,
work.
Tesla's work. So all that
He's
stuff too.
knighted, Sir Knight, John G. Trump.
No way, he was knighted.
Oh yeah, he got knighted by Queen Elizabeth, I'm pretty sure.
And that's Trump's uncle. I mean, it's a weird.
Could have been King Edmund or Edward or
Strange.
Right, that's what they were saying. It was like Trump holds the secrets. That's what someone was saying. That
they had that time travel book,
whole...
the Adventures of Baron Trump from like the 1800s.
Yes, I remember that too. Yeah,
I did not know that one.
That's entertainment. What you and I look into daily
too.
as our research work is not entertainment. It's like, oh, these are the sad facts of the matter that people aren't really getting to.
Right.
And there was a point in that Richard Gage clip where you guys were talking about 1993 World Trade Center bombing, and the informant for the FBI, I think you said Ramzi Youssef, but he's the guy they put in jail for it. The FBI informant is a guy named Imad Salem. He was an Egyptian military officer. His FBI handler was a guy named John Antisev. And when I first met Jason Burmis, so this is like 2006, my wife and I drove out to Oneonta. We're hanging out with Loose Change, and Burmis tells me about Imad Salem. And I didn't know about that at the time. I didn't have those details. And he's like, brother, you can have the recording. And he goes to the internet. He's like, here's the FBI guy right here. So I got to sit there and like, oh, wow. And, Salem's like, you're the one that told me to switch the fake bomb for the real bomb. You got, and they're it's the calls about arguing over expenses for him being an informant. But during that conversation, Salem was like, you guys are the ones that told me. And he's like, I know. And I was like, oh, geez. So yeah, understanding like the context of what is Iran-Contra, what was BCCI, these sort of things. And then 9/11, the story is a lot harder to believe, the official story, because you're like, wait a minute, you guys have been grooming Arab proxy forces for like years, and you got those from the British. So all of a sudden now those guys are rogue. They're not working for you.
Yeah, it's crazy because that's when John O'Neill was hired to investigate after the World Trade Center bombing. That's when he started getting into all those networks and started learning a lot about all that stuff and became the expert on that. And
that was the only other detail I think that I heard. Like I don't, because you said he started that day or the day before. It was like
it was actually, there was rumors. It turns out that he started like a month before. It was like
August 23rd or something.
That's why I brought up Jerome Hauer, because he's the one who got him the job, if I remember correctly.
And Hauer told the White House to go on Cipro.
Yeah, Cipro, the day that it happened, if I remember correctly.
Worked for Kroll. And then you had a bunch of dirt on Hauer in your presentation. What else do you remember off the top of your head, Jeremy?
Well, Hauer had been like knew exactly how the towers collapsed before anyone else did, and was assured that it was probably the jet fuel that heated up the beams and caused the structural failure.
He was at the Event 101 meeting.
Oh,
before Event 201.
The Event 201, yeah.
No, I'm saying back for 9/11, it was called the Event 101 meeting. That's where they decided on how things would go that day. Yeah. We'll have to see if there's a video for that one. But go ahead. Sorry.
There was another connection that I thought it was interesting that Richard Gage mentioned that early on when he had started Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, that Hauer had signed on and reached out, but he didn't trust him, so he didn't put him on the list because he thought he was up to something. So, but apparently, Hauer became suspicious. He said he didn't have really questions about the Twin Towers, but Building 7 kind of like, wasn't sure about how Building 7 came down, apparently, according to and I told Richard, like, you gotta dig up this conversation. He said he recorded it. I was like, you gotta post that, man. Like,
that's incredible. That's incredible, actually. That Hauer reached out to get. That's so wow.
That's far out, man.
Honeypot stuff there.
There was another point you brought up that I didn't realize, and so I knew World Trade Center 7, Solomon Smith, Barney Brothers building, right? I didn't realize SSB had that much real estate in it. It was like 83% of the building was them. And then the rest was CIA, SEC, emergency bunker. So they had a large part of that building. And that Rumsfeld and who else was on the board of directors of that company at the time when it happened? Because I was like, that's not coincidental right there.
They also had a small office on the same floor as the OEM, apparently. So I thought that was interesting. It's like,
well, they wouldn't want to have to rebuild the towers and have World Trade Center 7 stick out like a thumb. So they were kind of like, might as well pull it. We'll build all three, or we'll build the whole thing. Right. Because at the end of the day, it's I've always looked at it, seeing the players that are in it. It's like, first, it's geopolitical strategy to bring about like their wet dream as expressed in the Council on Foreign Relations and the Project for a New American Century, like New Pearl Harbor document. Underneath that, it's a real estate scam. It's real estate fraud where they take out insurance policies, they individual terrorist attacks on each building. So they get moolah coming out of that. They wanted to redesign and modernize, and they wanted to have somebody else foot the bill for it. And then out of that, they called it the Freedom Tower, but it's not the Freedom Tower anymore. And the memorial that they built on that place is like a black hole abyss. It is like such a disturbing monument that they have there. And if there was any justice, they would have taken that square area of real estate, whatever it is, 10 square acres, that part, and said no commerce can ever been transacted on this ground ever again because of those attacks. Right. But that's not what they're doing. They got to rebuild the whole place bigger, better, stronger. When I saw the rebuild of World Trade Center 7, it's such an ominous building, dude. You can just tell it's so over engineered so that no terrorist attack will ever take this building down again. And I'm like, these are permanent structures these people were building, and they're not the set pieces that got torn down that day. And it's pretty ominous the last 20 years what they've gotten accomplished with so little resistance or people catching on to what they did. So thank you.
It's amazing that I wish they had this. I could take like a time machine back with some of this information to like 2004 when it was first. It could have just hit so much harder than it did in the mainstream, because they were just able to take all these alternative kind of theories and just beat this down in the public eye to the point where you can't even talk about it without offending people, and they don't want to look into the actual information.
Well, it's one of those cases where the victims had to get close to their abusers, and then anyone who questions it, the abusers are saying, "Oh, you're doing an injustice to the victims by looking into these events." But
it's like an analogy to what's going on today.
Stockholm syndrome, dude.
Yeah, it's a form of Stockholm syndrome. Yeah. It's looking back on that entire situation. I mean, one of the things I did recently is I went back and just reviewed very quickly, like, what are the justifications for how these towers came down? Obviously, it's the burning of jet fuel that weekend. And so the argument, there's always back and forth. So it's like, well, it's, jet fuel at that burning at that Fahrenheit wouldn't be able to warp the steel enough for it to collapse in the fashion it did. In World Trade Center 7, they argue there was one major column that was the key form of the structural integrity, and that was on fire for like 7+ hours. I forget the number of time. And that caused a free fall collapse of the building once that beam gave way. But it's sort of, in that the issue comes into just physics. It's like, well, free fall, first of all, even if we grant them the hypothetical that, okay, jet fuel can burning at a specific temperature can warp, and because the beams are open, essentially the jet fuel somehow was on fire and then fell the whole way down to the bottom of the base, somehow warped all of it enough, burning at various temperatures, that it would cause a straight collapse the way it did at near free fall speeds. That's to me where it's like, if anything, wouldn't it buckle at certain points? Wouldn't there be different structural integrity issues? It'd be inconsistencies. So I'm going.
You wouldn't have two similar buildings doing the same thing.
Well,
neither one of them fell over and hit all the other buildings.
That's what I mean.
There were iron girders from World Trade Center 1 that were shot 500 feet across the street through Merrill Lynch and the Winter Garden behind that building. Girders don't do that. if they lose structural support. They fall straight down.
Right.
So there's all sorts of like pyrotechnic
Anomalies.
incendiaries, but people aren't used to watching such things. And that's why I really liked that Jeremy not only looked into like the AIG and Marsh, and you found those connections, but then you went and found all those other connections. What's the longest presentation? What's the one that has like all the stuff in it? Do you have a name for that?
I don't have like one that has everything. I made like 3 different versions of a documentary that I did about this. One was called, the first one I did was called 9/11 Conspiracy Solved, names, connections, details, and stuff. And that one's probably the most thorough. And I kind of chopped it down from there because there was a lot of stuff in there that wasn't core and didn't really stress on this whole continuity of government group, which I felt was like, I later, realized was an essential, core to the 9/11, where it was initially planned, when you're looking into that, the disaster scenario, the think tanks and all that, and scenario 12D, that whole concept of that scenario came from those COG think tanks, and that was a core part of it. And I did another one called Black 9/11 after Mark Gaffney's book, kind of talking about some of the he had elucidated in that book. Not all of them though, because he's got a whole theory on Flight 93 in there, and how it was taken down and exploded. But the whole Hammer Fund and all that I covered in the Black 9/11 one, which a lot of the financial guys, like people who really watch what you do, were interested in that and wanted me to focus more on that and future things. But I don't really have the financial background to kind of understand that so well. And I had one guy reach out to me who did, and wanted to connect a couple other dots for me with his investigations and stuff. So I got to reach back out to some people.
Yeah, my only problem with, like the problems that I remember with this book were there were ambiguities in his writing about my experiences, and those ambiguities had been removed, I thought, through the correspondence and provision of evidence. So it was like he was taking like this way over here, Grove claims. I'm like, well, at least Grove has provided evidence to the, toward the claim or something, right? So it was almost like, but anyway, I thought it was a good treatment. He looked at AIG and Kroll and Hank and, the whole Greenberg family. And there's so few people that talk about this. I was thankful that he's like, knew enough to ask me and not just write about it without asking, he's like, I can actually go to the source and get documents instead of looking from afar. So,
I remember a couple of interviews I'd seen with you. You talked about Michael Dukakis, I think was his name. Some of these other,
but his last name does start with a D, and I'm not looking to dox him and get his organizations looking at this podcast.
Oh yeah, huh? All right, cool. We'll have to talk about that more privately then. But
I'm pretty sure, because I told Gaffney, I'm not going to tell you his name, but his name's in the documents, and here's where it is in the documents. So it's like, I didn't want to be the doxer or leaker, but yes, he's a character.
Yes.
We'll call him
definitely
Mike D. And it's not Mike Delaney for anyone who's here from Autonomy tonight. It's not Delaney. It's another Mike D from New York City.
From the Beastie Boys.
No. Is he the one that passed away? Because I don't want to be associated.
No, that was Adam. Yeah.
Any ill communication. All right. So the documents surrounding some of these companies, the financial ones you didn't look into, but you started looking into the manufacturing and production and like military contractor providers of, things like that. And that's where you got like Dresser Industries, Hammer, and you started finding like a small group of people and the companies they sit on and the family control these things, right? Like you mentioned Securicom, which if memory serves was like Marvin Bush and Wirt D. Walker, right?
Yep.
That's Wirt two Walker Bushes. because Wirt Walker is George Walker Bush's side of the family, the Walker side of the family, and then Marvin Bush was also part of that. So he's a direct, like he's George Bush's brother.
That's Securicom, right? Marvin Bush.
Yeah, let me bring up. I got it in the history blueprint here. Let me see if I can get it.
And a lot of those guys came from the Carlyle groups. Frank Carlucci had worked with a lot of those Stratosec employees for a company called BDM International, which did a lot of Navy black projects. And
Carlyle Group was meeting on the morning of 9/11, right? And it had H.W. Bush and Salim bin Laden, the brother of the accused terrorist. And H.W. Bush had spent the night in the White House that night to go to the Carlyle Group meeting in the morning, and that's when 9/11 happened. So you got all these dudes involved. But I didn't have was Securicom Carlyle Group company, or they were?
Yeah, so Carlyle Group was a. You got to look. You got to look up the BDM International, which was Braddock, Dunn, and McDonough or something like that.
I'm pretty sure I don't have them, but
BDM was Braddock, Dunn, and McDonald. That's what it is.
Yeah.
So Braddock, Dunn, and
So
McDonald.
1990 Carlyle Group to buy BDM. Okay.
Yeah, and the Carlyle Group bought them out and brought a lot of those guys over to Securicom Stratosec. This is kind of what they did before. And
it was called Stratosec before, right? Securicom is the name later, or is it always Secure?
It was Securicom, but then a similar company sued them for that name, and they had to change their name to Stratosec. And during that lawsuit, apparently they had a bunch of frivolous motions and frivolous filings that just showed them they just wanted to show their legal opponents that they had money to burn, and when it came to lawyers, apparently.
Posturing a little bit,
I had Securicom under Kroll, Marvin Bush, Wirt Walker, and then off to the side, clients
kind of
World
like
Trade
Kroll.
Center, Dulles, and United Airlines. But I didn't have Los Alamos. Is that what you had mentioned earlier?
Yeah, I have to find. I'm gonna get that contract and I'll find it for you, because Kevin Ryan, I think, is the one who he published this in an article called The Top 10 Connections Between NIST and Nano-Thermites, where he started just connecting the dots between, NIST, this company called SAIC.
Oh, yeah.
Scientific Applications International Corporation, which SAIC became Leidos Corporation. And then Leidos, that's where Barry McDaniel ended up. Apparently, he works for Leidos Corporation, according to his LinkedIn account. And he was the COO of Securicom Stratosec on 9/11.
That's interesting, because just looking at some of the notes I had here, also worked for Battelle Hatfill. Hold on, let me see.
Well, Hatfill isn't that the name of the anthrax guy?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
yes, that's correct. And according to my notes,
Jerome
he also
Hauer
worked for
with
Battelle, which is
bioterrorism?
the chemical company you were talking about earlier, Jeremy.
The metallurgists.
The metallurgists, yes. Oh, not chemical. I'm sorry. Excuse me, metallurgists. And they were awarded a huge biodefense contract, supposedly right after 9/11. SAIC.
Dun, dun, dun.
So then
SAIC.
Hatfill was a friend of Hauer, and he was working on supposedly anthrax. That's the claim. Or AM at the Fort Detrick.
Yeah, but Porton Down had the same copy of that.
Oh, okay.
AIM strain of anthrax.
It was also going to Britain as well. Okay.
And Britain would also have a motive to send those letters to those people with that wording, because it's Anglo-Israeli relationship that's expressed in those notes.
And then Hauer, on top of that, being friends with Hatfill, is the one that tells him to take Cipro Bay on the day of 9/11. That was before this. That's
well, there's just, you got to get out your 9/11
many
coincidence bin, Tony, and put that in there and say there's nothing to see here. It's just a coincidence. And that bin will get very full very quickly.
Preponderance of evidence. Holy shit! At this point, I mean, it's just, and then the connections with Battelle, which I completely forgotten about. I did not realize that until Jeremy brought that up as the metallurgist. That's just interesting as well.
Jeremy, did you ever check out the document where the Joint Chiefs of Staff changed the aircraft piracy rules June 1st, 2001. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time trying to find that exact, because that was a claim that was made in a number of documentaries and other things around 9/11, is that they changed the authority of who could, order a shoot down, and just to make it just the vice president. Apparently, they removed that power from the Joint Chiefs of Staff and others in the chain of command.
All right, so let's see if I have it here, because I had it linked to a Google search. Like, this is the Google search you used to do to find it. Right. And it would show statement on aviation security, but that's posted 2004. Right.
Yeah.
Now it could say as amended June 2001. I don't know if I trust that. This might go to it. So I'd have to re-look it up. But I have the actual title. I have the links. We could go back in the Wayback Machine to find. And I also had a copy of it here. Let's see what this post is. Again, the title of it was Aircraft Piracy, Hijacking, Destruction of Derelict Airborne Objects. But I'm looking to see. Yeah, so I'd have to re-look it up. Oh, wait. PDF. What is this? Notes.
Somewhere.
Notes. We have some plan. Oh, this is 9/11 Commission Report. Oh, so if I go to page,
it's 9/11 report. You can see the top.
Yeah.
GPO-9/11 report.
Did I put in what page it is? In my notes. Do I have notes? Let's see. Notes. No, I didn't. I left myself hanging.
Control F, maybe.
Well, the point is,
we talked about that a couple episodes ago. Yeah.
I have a printout of it someplace. And
that one I remember, and I remember repeating that claim in one of my things, and then I got called out on it, and I had to try to go track it down, and I had a terrible time finding the actual documentation from the Joint Chiefs.
Yeah, so I have a printout of it in a folder, so those things don't happen, because I know the internet is tending to change these days. I don't have that folder down here, and I didn't think of looking this up, but I wanted to make sure that you knew it existed, and someone's already tried to call you out on it. Why don't they want people to know that exists, right? Because they now know it's hard to find. So it's like, oh, you might give up on presenting that point, and I'm like, no, that's why we got to go to that point and get it out there more. And I could,
we'll have to dig that up, because I'd love to. I like to take things like that and put it and resurface them every now and again, to make sure that they remember that video interview on MSNBC with L. Paul Bremer was taken down 3 times by Google Video, and it was it used to be banned, from even being presented. Now you can actually find it if you search for it directly and scroll down to page 70 on YouTube search.
It's funny, it's because their algorithm.
I was trying to paradoxically send it to LD. Sorry.
No, you're good.
Delay.
No, to Jeremy's point, though, a lot of stuff does get hidden, and the algorithm doesn't pick it up necessarily if it doesn't get the type of hits, because it's weighted based on hits and the interest that people give it to certain degrees. And then they look up certain keywords associated with it, and it has a sort of complex if-thens around it. But it's just if it's something that doesn't have a lot of notoriety, there's stuff that still remains on YouTube or other platforms that otherwise you would be shot down if it had the certain clout or notoriety with the number of people that watch it. So that's a good point. Whereas, one of the big things in True Stream Media just did a brilliant production about is what's been happening with the internet, obviously, over the past, for me, it was around 2016 election in America for us when Trump got elected, or I started noticing, and the cultural reaction to that. The internet became conspicuously, before that, people have been doing research in alternative communities, which I've been a part of for a long time, working with Rich for over 10 years. We had already noticed this trend, but it didn't become really conspicuous to me until about 2016, where it's like you would search for something, it's even what I would consider to be somewhat benign, and all of a sudden it would never, the websites I was used to frequenting, or the blogs or the news sources, they're all of a sudden not available the same way. And that's where I started noticing the algorithm was becoming very stringent. And
I think it took them a while to get hip to that. Honestly, I thought they were slacking on the intelligence, in my opinion, because for a number of like 4 years there, we dominated YouTube and Google Video. Like Google Video, like we dominated Google Video. Like when that was up, it was like we kept all the conspiracy. 9/11 conspiracy was at the top, and we kept it there for a number of years.
That's all it was. Yeah, I was the main conspiracy videos I would watch was always on. This was when I was in college. Was on Google Video. I actually probably downloaded what I could if it was even programs to allow me to download back then. I have to go back and look. Because I mean, then they took it down. I mean, that was so long ago, I can't remember. But I guess they're having trouble policing that. And then YouTube popped up, but YouTube was sort of a Wild West too. They couldn't really police anything on there as well. I mean, the sort of censorship around YouTube didn't really pick up until, again, the whole seemingly around 2016, which it seemed like 2016 gave them the precedent needed to then go around justifying supposedly that they need to control speech, which is very dangerous.
All right, so this is what this show does here. We get to the bottom of stuff. Okay, you go to Google Books, you type in this, you go to page 458 in the 9/11 Commission report. Here's the footnotes. But wait, there's more. We can actually look in the book, the hardcover that I showed you earlier. Let's go to page 458 and let's zoom in. Right here. Here's the aircraft piracy and destruction of derelict airborne objects, June 1st, 2001, Joint Chiefs of Staff memo. They did change stuff right before 9/11. And this is why Cheney can stand there and say in the bunker and say, yes, the orders still stand. Did you hear anything to the contrary? Because the orders were changed. He was in power of saying, don't shoot it down. Don't shoot it down. Let it hit the building. Up until then, there was a different chain of command that would have had that alleged Flight 77 shot down before it got anywhere near the Pentagon. And then when you ask the question, who changed the rules? You got the people who were in charge of the operation. So it's interesting that they claim that such things don't exist, and it's right there to be looked up at. And I already had that page marked in the hardcover.
No, wait, that would have been 3 months before. Yeah,
3 months before. See, if you look at my copy of this book, there was a green tab.
I think I have the actual order here
on this page.
You guys,
we can see it.
I had a green tab, see, on that page. I just highlighted it, but that page was already marked for such things.
Yeah, it would be in section C, in destruction of derelict airborne objects.
There you go.
Again, it's in it refers you to enclosure D. I remember there's like a whole bunch of these. You have to jump around and you have to have all these to like piece it all together, because they hit it in a lot of like legal terminology. It said like, oh, you have to refer to this section, refer to that, and refer to this. So you have to piece together like 3 different sources,
right?
In order to. Yeah, I remember they made it very difficult and
then hope with piecing it together, it doesn't become circular. That they're all just don't reference each other as to who has the answer. Yeah, it's what I'm.
Well, they do the thing. They don't give us all the information up front in the first place, and then over time, they just slowly keep taking away the facts that used to be there and easily referenceable to help people understand, right? And like you're saying, like 10, 15 years ago, it was a heyday of all sorts of people were noticing these things. And now it's like, that information is not available anymore. Yeah, that's it right there.
Yep. Yeah.
Control plus for a second and just like kind of zoom in on it so people at home can like see that screen capture. There we go. Juicy screen capture there. Boom, boom. Look that up. Read it. And then show it to people who think the guys with box cutters did it all. Because you asked the question, how did the guys with the box cutters write that memo?
Yeah,
it was in their favor. On 9/11, that memo plays in their favor, bro.
Well, it's nice when you start out with the questions and the answers you want to get, and then you just have to do a sort of dog.
Does it say limits are at the bottom? I'm sorry, I thought we were in Operation Northwoods. This is a different document, apparently.
Vice Admiral Fry.
Yeah, brought to you by the people who do.
Who would stand to profit? Why would AIG have connections to Kroll? And then there's Marsh. Largest one of the largest law firms, one of the largest insurance groups, AIG. as well. And then you have Kroll Associates, one of the more
corporate investigations industry.
Yeah, it's really private security, corporates investigate. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like the private
Securicom is basically like a Kroll as well. Now, Kroll has connections to the CIA. It's like they're private contractors. There's connections to private contractors.
It's like an international private intelligence agency.
Right. Yeah,
But
basically.
Brought to you by certain state actors, not America.
But they did a lot of the electronic security and badging, the Securicom Stratasec. So they had all the contracts for the cameras, the DVRs, the surveillance systems, and also the electronic swipe cards to get.
Do you know how to do the Proxima cards? Do you know like how to read the information off of one of those cards? Because I still have my original World Trade Center ID, which is it doesn't look like it, but it's a Proxima card, and when you would put it near the thing, the doors would open and whatnot. And I would like to see like what information's actually on the card.
Yeah, we could try to. We could check that out.
I needed a nerd to ask that question too, because I'm like, I don't know how to do it.
I'd have to run it through like I'd have to go get like the systems to do that. But you have an FOB and an FOB reader. It's called a FOB. FOB.
Yeah, we do that in our industry actually.
That's interesting. Yeah, I wonder what information is on it. Normally, it's just a PIN number, and that number is actually associated with that card in their actual system.
Yeah, but it gives me,
which gives them on authentication.
Yeah, because when you go to the World Trade Center back in the day, they would take your picture and give you a paper temporary card. So every time you went there, you had to stand in line. And finally, I was there often enough that Marsh was like, "We're going to give you an ID." So I went down to like 94th floor. 95th. It was a downstairs thing, and I didn't have to use the elevators. Every couple floors in the Marsh area, they had a stairway that would go down to the other floor. So I went down to security, and I got a hard pass, and but it only let me open doors on like 96, 97, like where our office and our workers were as like contractors. So, but I still have that. It's good through December of 2001, so it wasn't expired yet.
Yeah, it's generally I'll tell you how some of the systems work, and they're on different zones or different areas, and some of them are cleared for those areas that you work in, and some of them are can be like individual doors, individual zones and stuff. So they have it all organized inside of like a system on a computer, where again it would be your number would be associated with an ID card, which would have access granted to it within another secure program.
I just didn't know how much information they would have stored on it. Would they have like my address, telephone number, driver's license number, other things associated with
not
with
necessarily
the ID?
on the card, but
it would be associated
in the computer.
In the computer. So like then
right.
that's where the servers would connect with, that's like where the ERP systems would come in. They would connect to different databases that then would be able to pull up. So like that number could tie you to another database if they wanted to look that up, and the IT staff to see your name, your address, but that wouldn't be on the card itself. The card's just relaying a number that's on a database, to Jeremy's point, because we do this when we set up security and manufacturing corporations, when we do the ERP systems. Like it just all relates to like a central database that then can tie into other business processes or other business modules depending on what you want.
So that fob, that area is just basically it's a magnetic inductor, and it activates a chip inside the card, which has an RFID thing in there, and all that RFID thing is it spits out a number. It's a radio frequency active identification number, and it just, when it gets the electronic charge from that, when you put it up to that fob, it spits out the number, and then there's a reader inside there that reads that number that it spits out. And
right on. All right, so there's no information lurking on that card then that's waiting for us to
all the
access.
information is on the computer based on the number that it went back, but those computers and those systems are long since
they don't exist anymore.
Yeah
Who knows where they went?
Convar.
Right. That's a good point. Convar. Yeah.
Convar. Yeah, that was a good one. I should have mentioned that. That's another key piece of the puzzle. Should
I
probably
mean,
go
if you
back
look at it
over.
as like a forensic historian or just like a forensic investor, not even a historian, a forensic
Yeah, German
investigator.
company recovering all this hard drive data found in the rubble, and then Kroll
German
buys
company, and then Kroll buys it. All the steel is shipped to China.
China.
So, I mean, it's like China. Yeah. So like, it's just very weird. You think of a crime scene, you want to preserve the evidence as well as you
if
can.
If you go back to the original Ocean's 11, there's Sammy Davis Jr. putting like shape charges on girders in the building, because in both Ocean's 11s, there's a deverticalization of a building.
Yeah.
And there's a gang, like a whole thievery type thing going on while everyone thinks something else is going on.
Yeah.
A whole lot of
bait and switch. Yeah.
Some really interesting symbology.
Misdirections.
When did they remake Ocean's 11? And when did Matt Damon and George Clooney turn around, face the camera while the building drops behind them?
Why name it? Why be 11? Well, I guess it goes back to the 1960s film, which goes back to them. Probably
George Clayton Johnson.
Wait, really? He's one of the.
Yeah, he wrote that.
He wrote that? I did not know George. Okay, interesting.
Ocean's 11. Yeah, he might have had a partner on it, but he wrote that.
Okay.
Yeah, back in the day. All right, so yeah, where were we before we got stuck in George Clayton Johnson land? He's also in the Jack Harrow movie. Now that I'm thinking about it, The Emperor of Him.
I'll have to go back and watch the original Ocean's 11.
Talking about Convar though. Sorry. Good.
Oh yeah, hard drives in the dust picked up by Kroll Associates.
Well, there's a bunch, like Jeremy. There's a bunch. I'm sure you know about most of them, but there's the Patriot, right? 9/11, 9 pounds 11 ounces. There's like
I remember finding stuff like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so at the beginning of the movie, the Mel Gibson movie, The Patriot from like 1996 or whatever that is, he is making a rocking chair, and in the first scene of the movie, he's weighing a rocking chair, and he says 9 pounds 11 ounces.
Then he sits on it.
Perfect. I was like, what? Who needs a 9 pound rock? Like, what's the deal with that, man? And it's just this interesting part of.
But then
like,
he
that would
sits
be more
on
Jay
it,
Dyer,
and it falls apart.
Revelation
right?
of the method.
So like, there's the whole
revelation of the method.
Yeah. So.
Planning ahead of time and letting people know, like the lone gunman and those types of things that they put out before then. You know, would they have a commandeered aircraft going into the World Trade Centers a couple months before they actually did it? I mean, come on, no one's investigating that. Yeah, so
that science fiction show. Yeah, I mean, there's
the X-Files or the other one,
X-Files.
The Lone Gunman.
And X-Files, I think, were the two I was thinking of.
Yeah, that was an amazing episode. Everyone I show that to is like, this came out before 9/11. Yeah, it did. Like,
so a couple weeks ago, we went over the Titanic, sort of, because it's sort of it came up, and it was interesting because it's sort of like the first case for the potential conspiracy around insurance fraud. At least, like, that's one angle that can be played, because there's a sister ship. What was it called? The Titan.
Oh yeah, two.
There's two, and then there was damage.
Olympic
and they couldn't
the
get the insurance for it. Or the Olympic. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But the book, The Titan, was where they come up with the hypothetical fiction.
Wreck of the Titan.
Fictional, or Wreck of the Titan. Yeah, but the book, Wreck of the Titan.
Comes
with the fictional scenario, 1898 fictional scenario about, and in the first like couple of pages that outlines almost exactly what happens with Titanic, but it was the Olympia with and it's weird because, you know, that ship gets damaged. They couldn't get the insurance on it. It goes back to harbor where exactly the Titanic takes off from. Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of very strange coincidences around that whole situation as well.
So it's hard to discern.
It's like a weird
analogy. It takes work. It takes purposeful work to discern the correlations from the causations and these things that are like bright, shiny things, but don't tie into the who, what, where, when, why, and how.
Right. Did Trump just read that book and decide to name his son Barron, or is he really a time traveler?
Synchronicity, or coincidence. Yeah,
he's like, this will really mess with people if I name the kid Barron.
So Jeremy, I know we talked about this a little bit earlier, but someone in our community just asked me, and maybe I want to actually sort of follow up, but sort of twist the question a little bit. Sorry, Tim. Tim asks, any thoughts on Dr. Judy Wood, dustification, use of directed energy weapons?
So yeah, we'd started getting into that, and I didn't really like come full circle with that because you know, again, you mentioned that the floor plan was 1 acre wide, so you got to think about how big those floors are and how how big the object is, that spire in that video and stuff like that, because you can't claim molecular dissociation with the resolution that you're viewing that at, because it could just be dust.
That's a great
as I
point.
mentioned, a lot of the steel in this building was fireproofed on the inside with the spray-on fireproofing. That spray-on fireproofing wasn't so much a paint as it was gypsum.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So gypsum is like drywall material. So if you start cracking it, it turns to dust quite easily, and if you're blowing up a building's worth, it can create quite a bit of dust. So there's arguments that what you're seeing is in reality is dust. It's not the building turning to dust. It's just that a lot of dust is going up in the air. Because Judy Wood also makes the argument that there wasn't a large rubble pile left over. In fact, there's numerous photos of the rubble pile.
Huge, and a lot of it was shipped off.
Like
that's
it's
massive,
6 stories,
massive.
60 feet, about 6 stories.
But I remember seeing some of those photos early on. I mean, there's a massive rubble pile. That's exactly true. I mean, that's.
Yeah, so there's certain things that Judy Wood said that I just I don't agree with as far as the forensic evidence and the facts, and just her using of a lot of she avoids a lot of scientific terminology in favor of like kitchen item, the bubbler, the fizzer, like this.
Well, it's like I always try to separate the messenger from the message, because she's almost like the most eccentric person you could have positioning the topic, right? And I have her book, and I like to listen to everybody, and I reserve my right to make a decision later. I don't know yet, but I'm looking at all this stuff, right? So if you separate her and put Judy Wood over here, eccentric presenter, and just look at the stuff that she's saying, it's like, does the government use tax dollars to make any type of energy weapons? Oh yeah, Department of Energy, right? And so there are aspects of this. They do have technologies they haven't revealed
Correct.
to the public.
That's what
all
we
these
were
types
talking
of
about
things,
earlier.
right?
That's right.
But so I would go away to so I don't know about her claims, but is that like they showed it to us in a James Bond movie where they had like the satellite GoldenEye or whatever.
GoldenEye, yeah.
GoldenEye was actually an operation. GoldenEye is the name of Ian Fleming's, or was it? It was one of their hideouts down in the Bahamas. So there's a GoldenEye like plantation, but there was Operation GoldenEye back in World War II that Ian Fleming was in on, right? So I'm not saying it was directed energy weapons or anything like that. I'm just saying the people running the show have already shown us predictive programming where such things exist. And you've had this Reagan Star Wars program and armed satellites and rods of God and all this stuff floating around the planet. They might have used something that we haven't seen yet, and I'm open to that, but not from her explanation.
I'm open to.
Me too.
Yeah,
that's where I wanted to transition. The question is like, because you mentioned you have people that you communicate that talk about the Hutchinson effect, which she obviously is big into in regards to field physics and directed energy weapons and these sorts of concepts. So I appreciate your openness to say maybe Judy Wood isn't the best representation for that, or the evidence that she's pointing to isn't the best evidence to implicate the use of directed energy weapons.
Described on purpose to make the.
Or it could be it could be a straw man. It could be a straw man to tear down the possibility that some sort of weaponry was or was not used, but to hide the fact that there possibly has been development of.
But on the flip side of that, I watched that Heavy Watergate movie one time, and I had concerns about the Department of Energy too. What are they up to over there?
But I appreciate so speaking about the Jeremy though, I appreciate the fact you still, because Judy was dubious, but still are willing to at least consider a possibility, because a lot of physicists, a lot of people who have been trained in the science, you're trained as a physicist.
There's a good interview that she did with Greg Jenkins, where he's an actual scientist who really is knowledgeable about a lot of this stuff and asks her a lot of really good questions and catches her in a lot of it's a good interview. Greg Jenkins, if people want to dive into that and look that up. And I've asked Judy Wood to come on and debate, and I've asked her proponents to have debate with me on this and stuff, and they tend to run away from that kind of stuff. They tend to go on a lot. She was real popular on a lot of underground channels, including going on, coast to coast AM and stuff like that. So she made the circuits, and then they sent out a massive email campaign that to which my professors at a small state college here in Massachusetts even got their emails, and wow. They had gotten the emails and forwarded to me because they were like, my professors were like, oh, here, this is up your alley. I know you're into all this stuff. So they sent it to me, and they didn't really look into it too much themselves, but it just gives them the impression that, because they're so busy with, their university duties and whatever they're doing in
research
in
grants, hyper specialized fields, and whatever.
They don't bat an eye at that stuff. They just forwarded it to me because they know I'm interested in it, and but that's their interpretation of what this is out there. And of course I responded back to them and showed them, here's some of the other theories and other information on what happened as well, so that this isn't the only woman out there questioning the science. There's more legitimate questionings of the science, and with a little bit less speculation on what and she tries to say that she doesn't speculate, but her first right out the gate, she had published a paper with Morgan Reynolds on directed energy space-based weapons systems,
and he used to work in the Reagan and Bush administrations, right? Because I've talked to Morgan Reynolds before, and I was like, this guy's maybe not like us, he's a little bit different, and so
he was the no plane theory, saying that the holes weren't big enough for the impacts and the tower stuff, and the other guy saying that was this guy Albert Stubblebean, who's psychological warfare operations, working with Rima LeBeau, and he was mentioned by Kay Griggs in that 6-hour talk that used to.
Oh, that's fascinating, right? I forgot about I remember Kay Griggs, but I didn't remember that connection because I remember her talking about
that's
Kissinger.
Why, as you learn names, you got to go back and listen to that, because a lot of what she's talking about, General Gray and all those guys were involved in exactly what she specified.
It's all Psy-War stuff.
Yeah, it's psychological warfare, exactly. Yeah. So you start looking into that. The whole thing with the Judy Wood thing is it was just, it tried to make people look at Hurricane Erin. It tried to make people look up in space everywhere, red but herrings. Inside the towers, and it was.
Don't look at the vault underneath the trade centers.
Don't look at the financial.
Look away.
Or look too closely. Look in the fine dust, and look on this, and now we're arguing that when you vaporize the aluminum and the iron in the building, it turns to what looks like nano-thermites, because it's just vaporized building components. So there, we've explained away all your thermite stuff, and you don't have to look into that anymore. So,
and that's why they covered it with aluminum 50 years ago. And then you can come all full circle back to the construction. It's an interesting piece of work. And I think the truth is somewhere between where you're covering it and where, like, there was I'll use another cinematic reference.
Rich, gotta be careful.
A cinematic reference. 1984, 85, there was a film called Real Genius with Val Kilmer.
It's a great film. Yeah.
In there, he's they take these hyper smart kids at a university, which is a front for military research. They get these kids to make a super laser, and then they find out the military is going to take the laser up in the air and vaporize targets.
But they tell the students that they're doing it just for, it's like research or it's some sort of hypothetical project. It's not something they're actually trying to manifest. In front of them and stuff.
It's a crazy movie. But so I think it's somewhere between what you're describing and what they probably have on national security, which means we have to guess on it because we don't know exactly what it is or how it works. Well, but if that laser was an invisible part of the spectrum, if they used energy from a non-visible part of our spectrum so that the laser is not apparent to the visual eye or to cameras,
but the effects could be dependent. See, that's Jeremy's point about the microwave radiation.
And it all depends on those free electrons in the surface of the material that you're trying to, so if you have an ionization energy, it will knock those electrons off and ionize them, and that causes
the two big questions is like, where do you get the energy to do it? And then if there was a directed energy, there should be some
there's contracts. So there's contracts for who built those directed energy lasers or masers or whatever have you. And there's there's a lot of technical detail within those contracts or the patents for those devices. Which you can look up a lot of the stuff on how particle beam weapons and other things that they've experimented with. There's
Department of Energy contractors and researchers working on such things.
Yeah, it's Department of Energy, but also there's a number of private companies that have developed similar systems with direct energy weapons.
As well.
BAE is a big one.
Yeah. British
Raytheon.
Aerospace Engineering.
Mm-hmm.
Raytheon.
Raytheon.
So there's a number of companies with the contracts, even for U.S. naval laser weapons. So they have these systems on our battleships that can take out incoming, missiles.
Yeah, I've seen those ones where they chain a bunch of capacitors like together to have like a sort of it's like a laser like weapon almost. That was interesting on a massive naval carrier where it's just like chains of capacitors, which are like almost like mini batteries in a way to store up enough charge, then have this ridiculous. But the problem was the energy to generate that charge. Like that's to have that over and over again.
They use flywheels and stuff to charge.
Okay.
I would say this group is part of the globalist not friendlies, right? So did they have any capacity to make some of the things maybe on 9/11 appear? Because they're right in the midst of autonomous weapon systems, Bandar, Bush, Michael Chertoff, Carlyle Group, MI6.
One of the things
it would be interesting to look into that. I mean, as far as the energetic capabilities go, it's just more plausible to me to believe that came from chemical energy stored in pre-planted explosives. That it seems like these alternative theories are trying desperately to get people to look away from those types of connections.
I agree. That's Occam's razor too. One must not multiply entities beyond necessity. In other words, multiply hypotheses and like the chemical energy, the energy stored in sort of chemicals would be
in other words, if
also
it's plausible,
from a cost perspective
and a cost, right? The plausibility, right?
Yeah, Occam's razor says there's no need to bring anyone else into the buildings coming down when the owners plausibly did it themselves.
Fair enough.
Yeah, exactly.
Fair enough, right?
Also, like as far as a space-based weapon, it would have to be in a geostationary orbit to strike the same point on the globe twice, because otherwise you need two of these things, and then that doubles the cost. And if they're this kind of energetic capability, that and then again the issue is that if you have a weapon that is capable of this level of destruction, why are we still drone striking weddings, and why aren't we taking these guys out with these weapons from space, this light from and why haven't there been other targets internationally that we've taken out with this weapon, or
other nations possibly having developed similar technology? I mean, it multiplies again entities beyond necessity. Go back to William of Ockham. The idea is this ifs and what ifs, hypotheticals on top of hypotheticals on top of hypotheticals.
I would say because they haven't unveiled it publicly yet, and they haven't had, because of the strategic use of whatever they did on 9/11, they haven't had to do much else. I mean, when 9/11 happened, they were like, oh, these guys jumped, and they, we know that they allegedly took 4, but the news that day was like they had 8 airplanes that they hijacked, and this could just keep happening for days. There was they'd have to shut everything down. But nothing ever happened really after that, except the anthrax, right? So it's like Al Qaeda had us down, but all of a sudden they let it. Right? The C4 that he tried to light with his Bic, which doesn't make sense, and that's like there to tell people who can think that's a fake story, and it's there for people who don't know the difference. Yeah.
So there's one more question from our audience. Don't mind, Jeremy, that just asked. Can you ask him about his position on the nuclear theories? Like the Dmitry Kozlev. Yeah. So as a researcher, it's our job to consider all theories. We don't know until we observe it and start to look at it and think about it and let it marinate. And we don't have to make a decision right away on any of these given things. So I remember going through Kozlev's research, and I found it somewhat compelling. I'm like, they did something well. I was actually with you at that time, and it was interesting.
They didn't blow out the bathtub that would have let the Hudson River in. Like, it was a very precise construction, type of thing. And when he said they'd use this all the time over there, and he had experience, I was like, okay, I'll listen to him. So what did you think? You remember doing that research?
Yeah, it's just nukes that don't give off the radiation signature and don't have the byproducts. Apparently,
they're micro, almost like
5th generation mini nukes or
shaped charges, but there was tritium being shot out of that that real estate for a long time.
Apparently there some of that tritium can be traced to the exit signs. Apparently they have a small amount of the radioactive isotope in the exit signs.
Interesting.
During a power down, or there's no power in the building, they want the signs to actually glow.
I don't know about that, if I buy that, because I thought the tritium detection was from like drones.
What's the half-life
satellite
on that? Like, because you'd have to do like what a spectrometer reading, and like how long does the tritium or the ions from the tritium last? Like, there's so many questions that.
So there's a dust study that was done by Deutsche Bank, and there's a couple other ones that you can actually have the isotopic readouts on the scale. I don't think that there was any solid evidence of radioactive isotopes, indicating the use of nukes. So I
didn't get that from Kozlev's research. I remember from back, like within a couple years afterwards, and I remember seeing some maps and it being like credible information, but I hadn't connected it to any micro nukes or anything like that. I didn't hear Kozlev's thing till like probably 10 years after that. So
it's interesting that they use compelling to me. Sorry, go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, it's just interesting that if it was disinformation, that they'd use like a Russian source for it, to kind of like,
He passed away though, didn't he? Recently, I forget if he's.
So my thing with the thermite's always been like, I remember seeing. Okay, so was it the 9/11 conference?
There were some counter arguments against thermite. Like,
no, I just remember I was at the 9/11 conference in 2006, and I'm pretty sure I walked into the auditorium and Stephen E. Jones was either presenting or somebody was playing the footage that he plays where the molten metal is just coming out of the side of the building, and you're like, there's a exothermic reaction going on there that doesn't look like jet fuel. And that's where I first kind of became aware of that hypothesis. So I was like, that's one thing to cut those girders, but it doesn't account for the pulverization of all that rebar concrete, right? So I've never thought
the same Stephen Jones with the cold fusion. Stephen?
Yes.
Oh,
did you not get that?
Oh man, I forgot. It's been so long. Oh my god.
And the heavy Watergate, Stephen E. Jones from the Department of Energy that threw Pons and Fleischman under the bus. Yeah. Apparently looks to be the same Stephen E. Jones, doesn't work for the Department of Energy and sells us thermite. But if you looked up his contracts and what he did for, like, I don't know if it was Lawrence Livermore, but I remember looking into it and I was like, it's almost like you would have
a guy to get Stephen to come on and clarify that, because I wanted to get him to come on and give like an account of that. He had sent me a link years back on, clarifying his work on cold fusion and directing Pons and Fleischman to hold that first press conference, so that they got so much flack from the scientific community. They said,
I would love that.
Science isn't done by. Yeah. So there was a number. It looked like there was a concerted effort to character assassinate Stephen Jones when he started speaking out about the thermite stuff. Because anytime I'd post that stuff around, I would get the same people approach me and give me that information, and it would come from a number of different sources. I
saw it because I watched the heavy Watergate film and I was just doing like cold fusion research, and then all of a sudden it's the guy on screen. I was like, is this the same guy from the 9/11 movement?
It is.
And I rewound it and watched, and it's like when the Department of Energy was threatened by Pons and Fleischman, the Department of Energy sent their own James Bond to kind of disrupt the situation. And it just seemed like when the thing came around and it was like nano-thermite, and I was always asking, what's the source of the powder that you guys analyzed? And when you get to the answer that it was just like anonymously sent to them, I was like, how do you even know it's from the same site? Like, it wasn't like collected by anybody that we know from the site to be like evidence. And
so there's a number. I got some of the names of the people that actually collected the dust. And
was it like Niels Harrit and those guys back in the day? That was like that group that did the analysis.
Yeah, Niels Harrit was one of the guys that did the analysis. There was a number of people that saved dust samples and then submitted them. One was that Kelly. I have her in one of my slides there from my presentation. I thought but one of the woman's name was Kelly. There was another older woman with some real Coke bottle glasses that worked near the World Trade Center. She's got to be dead by now. She was really old then, 20 years ago. So there are names actually for the people that collected the dust and submitted the samples and stuff. And there's also a record of approximately where the dust samples were taken from. And that's all in the Bentham Open report, I believe. The studies that were published, but it's in the first part of it, like the chain of custody of where they got it from, because that was an important factor with a lot of it.
You would have thought everyone would collect dust from the scene, but no one really. I don't know. It's like I saw the dust.
The shock
I didn't collect
of the
any
moment, right?
I have volcanic ash from Mount St. Helens upstairs that my grandparents had gone there as tourists after the thing and got me the volcanic ash. And I used to take it to show and tell and be like, hey, but you would have thought that, having things like that, I would have been like, here's an empty vial. Let's get some, evidence, and who knows what we can do with it later. But let's, see what's in all this dust that's everywhere in like inches deep.
I don't really blame you or others for not considering that, though. No. If you think about the shock at the moment,
yeah, dude.
Like,
and I remember the debunkers coming out and saying that the microspheres were fly ash from an incinerator dump, and all these other they're coming up with all these other plausible explanations for the evidence that was coming out, and so there was a lot of that early on. And then they tried to position Stephen Jones as yes, he was this DOE inside man to disrupt the cold fusion thing, and and they try to frame it as that's what he's trying to do with the 9/11
I remember that.
But that heavy Watergate film was like from the 90s, so it was like a pre 9/11 film. That's the other thing. It wasn't like simultaneous to that. It existed in the past.
So there was that accusation came before then, and the heavy Watergate. I have to check that heavy Watergate film out.
Yeah, it's got the guy from Quantum Leap. Dean Stockwell is the narrator for it. I'm pretty sure he's like he's doing some voice work in the 90s.
A long time ago. I should revisit that. I haven't seen it.
I know my buddy Paul Verge had asked Jones on during an interview or something about it, and he just smiled and walked away. So nobody has gotten us an official statement, and I don't know that he's published a statement or anything like that. I don't need it. I just, when I look at these topics, there might be something from Department of Energy other than thermite is what my thought is. That's all. It has nothing to do with the messenger. It's just about like what technology exists on the shelf.
Yeah, from my understanding with cold fusion is that there's even departments still, there's a very small amount of funding. Like there's a small Italian university, and there's a couple other universities around the globe that have a tiny bit of funding to try to reattempt it, but they can only sustain a cold fusion reaction for essentially microseconds or something.
U.S. Navy labs,
which could just be a magnetic sort of.
Yeah, SPAWAR, Larry Forsley of SPAWAR and the U.S. Navy's lab confirmed tritium production in cold fusion reactions. So that they've come out with a lot of evidence, showing that these types of nuclear reactions are possible.
Right? That's what I've But the
problem
is
they aren't interesting that it's connected to this Hutchinson effect stuff with a lot of the research that I've seen. The people that are working on it now, there's a guy called the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project named Bob Grenier, who does a lot of his own personal research into transmutating elements under similar, cold fusion effects and stuff like that. So there's some interesting
symmetry of
done.
Nucleic. So the nucleic part, like the protons, the electrons, and the neutrons, like there's some sort of like weird symmetry, geometric symmetry that occurs under like the fusion reaction is happening because of some sort of like weird symmetry, some sort of like field effect essentially that is causing, that is like what's the word I'm looking for?
Well, normally in normal fusion you have what's called the Coulomb barrier, and it's this outer electron shell has this a charge with the electron shell, and you can only push two protons close enough together, in this Coulomb barrier provides a massive barrier to overcome, and if you could cross that barrier, then the two protons and the two nuclei will touch together and they'll fuse. But normally we do this through an in like fusion reactors, we try to, put a ton of energy in there.
It's just like a friction.
Or
We
pressure.
force exactly.
But the idea is
that's not
inside
elegant.
No, it's not elegant. Yeah.
inside of a lattice of a metal, like a metal lattice, like for example, they have palladium deuteride is the lattice that they use for the Pons and Fleischmann use, and a lot of the replications use is deuterium is heavy water, of course, so it's heavy hydrogen. It's just hydrogen is just a proton with an electron, a single proton. But if you add a neutron, it gets it a little bit heavier, but doesn't change the charge because neutrons are neutral. So it's still the same charge as hydrogen. It's just a little bit heavier than hydrogen, and that's called deuterium. And then if you add another neutron, it's tritium. So
heavy Watergate.
Yeah. So this is the whole idea is behind it, is that if you put stuff inside of a lattice, you can get them, things squished together, and you can get transmutation of elements under other conditions.
How does the Hutchinson effect play into that? Because my understanding, the Hutchinson effect had to do with extremely high voltages with different directed at specific materials, creates very strange sorts of effects.
Gravity-like effects.
Gravity shielding effects, which that has to do with like the whole ether theorist idea.
Yeah.
So there's a model that they have of this, your particle in the box, and that's called your Hamiltonian. So if you're adding real high electrostatic charges to it, you're adding really high potentials to that equation. So you could potentially, reach different results in the end wave equation for the physics. So there's different models, including Peter Hagelstein's Hydroton model. That's one of the latest ones, and Edmund Storms and some of these other guys are working with similar models for how fusion occurs in these types of situations and stuff. But again, the experimental side of this is we have some data on this, but it's no one's from any of those organizations has come up with a definite plan on how to use wave interferometry or any of these methods that have been claimed is going on in the physics. No one's actually been able to demonstrate and show this happening, and then also come up with
working reaction or something, or
working hypothesis of how to do this, how it's done. How do we take a laser and vaporize steel and molecular dissociate steel?
It's like lasing a stick of dynamite.
So as far as the
cool theory, it's cool stuff, but it's like, where's the practice? And then that's sort of where you have to separate the science from the science fiction.
Correct.
And,
I have to give you the science trivia, because I talked about Real Genius, Val Kilmer. If you go to the 1996-ish film, The Saint, also with Val Kilmer.
That's another Val Kilmer.
Elizabeth Shue talks about Pons and Fleischmann.
Oh,
yeah. She draws it out on the board.
Cold fusion, but it's about the economic impact of cold fusion. If
and Russia, oligarchs,
there's
and
Russia
oil
involved.
It's really good, and it's not in the original theme. I mean, that's the plot in 1996, but the series, The Saint, ran in the 60s, right? So you have to separate the series from that particular theatrical plot, which has Russian oligarchs, just like they got today.
Well, to me, it's always seemed like whether cold fusion or that's just not nucleic acids, but subatomic particles that we're talking about, but the lattice structure of those particles. But like, they're the Hutchinson effects. These are essentially effects that have happened. That's just like superimposing them onto a narrative in regards to 9/11, not cold fusion necessarily, but the Hutchinson effect is being sort of the theoretical foundation for the possibility of high voltage or directed energy weapon systems being used. That's where the
not unlike what Tesla did. That was all high voltage, and
Tesla was trying to set up like a resonant transformer with like the ionosphere or something like that, which that's create static charge. Yes, right.
Earth currents,
static charges, and hurricanes.
Because that's why he built his Wardenclyffe Tower underneath a running river system, or not river, but like a water system to create like a static charge at the top that he could then try to somehow dial in as being with like transforming the high voltages from above. Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. I mean, whether it's possible, I mean, it's very interesting. It's very interesting.
He did it live.
he tried to do it live and that got shut down pretty quickly. I don't know if it's possible. I really don't. It's a very interesting theory.
Yeah, again, with a lot of this stuff is I have to look for experimental proof of concept. And
yeah, that's why I liked your channel back there. I still like your knowledge, because you always grounded really like these incredible theories, but you tried to actually explain the possible
pun. He grounds it.
Physics. He grounds it. Yes.
Takes those electrons to the ground.
One of my favorite videos you did, this is me nerding out real quick, is when this is years and years and years ago, you were talking about the potential creating for an anti-gravity or gravity shielding effect through like a UFO like disk structure. And you're talking about, could you take a ferrofluid like a mercury and spin around like a electromagnet? But the problem is you have to create a superconductive effect. So we don't really have the ability at high temperatures and pressures to spin it fast enough to be able to cool it enough to create
the key is you got to take superconductive materials to near absolute zero.
But the problem is we don't have the material to create the absolute zero or
material science.
So now they're using liquid light, and they're using trapped. Yeah, it's trapped light and liquid light. So that's where we've been at like the last 5 or 10 years with a lot of the interesting research coming out on that. So now you're not going to need to push around mercury fluid or super fluid. You can actually just use liquid light, because liquid light is itself a superfluid, a superconducting superfluid at room temperature. So
is that almost like plasma is like a gas of ionized particle. That's liquid light. I'm trying to.
Well, plasma is its own form of.
It's its own form of matter. Yeah.
It's a little bit different.
I'll have to check that out. That's fascinating. I appreciate that. I have to follow up with all that I've gotten.
Yeah,
it's cool. One more nerdy thing before we go back to something else. They have this Bell experiment. So it's in a double vacuum of glass, and there's 2 batteries, there's 2 bells, and there's a ringer, and it's just ringing. And they estimate it's rung about 10 billion times so far. It's been in action since like the 1880s, and it's self-powering essentially from its structure. So the scientists today don't know how it works, and they're scared to take it apart because they don't know how to put it back together. And they hypothesize at some point the thing will stop ringing. But it's interesting what they could build back then that still works today and hasn't been plugged into any electricity.
Interesting. Yeah, like the Helmholtz resonances and
I was just thinking
there's a lot of a lot of interesting stuff like that in the Great Pyramids too, like the structure of the Grand Gallery and also like the structure of the even the other pyramids, like that give these weird reflective resonances and stuff like that.
There's weird sonic resonances that occur inside the various chambers, kings, queens chamber. There's also like weird static electric effects at the top of the pyramids as well. There's a lot of interesting and very strange theories in regard, but at the same time very interesting, because they almost act like resonant sort of conductors, which that's like
again,
is that where you get your name alien scientist from your like pyramid and early origins research, or where does the moniker come from?
I came like in 2008 when I was trying to come up with a cool name for a channel for YouTube, and I was just like, well, it's kind of like alien technology, but I wanted, it's science and stuff. So like the whole idea of what would this whole idea of alien civilizations, they got to have that's what it is. They have to have farmers and carpenters and spaceship builders and everything else in their civilization. So they got to have scientists too. And that would be like the coolest thing is if if I was going to talk to any alien, of course I'd want to talk to a scientist and figure out what they know about science and technology. So yeah, it's kind of where I came up with the idea or the name for that. And I don't know. I thought it was kind of cool because it's like nobody else is the alien scientist, so I get to be the alien scientist.
Yeah, that was a good handle for back then. I remember it was probably around that time, maybe a couple years earlier. I was on joerogan.net. I was consuming all the crazy stuff on that website that he used to have. And he used to have a link that went to this page called Elf Trance or something like that. and it's like it had these monkeys in the jungle, and the aliens come down and give them mushrooms, and then all of a sudden they're like building pyramids. It was this whole evolution of civilization kind of cartoon graphic novel, and it was interactive. So if you went over here, you could like chill out with the aliens and get some of their tech and bring it back to your people. You'd have to use Wayback Machine to find something like that, but I'm pretty sure that's what it was called, like Elf Trance or something like that.
Like ELF, like extremely low
Low
frequencies.
frequencies,
Yeah. I'm trying to remember, but such things don't exist anymore, I'm sure, to easily find.
It was an interesting.
Someone's got to have it on the Wayback Machine or something. I never. That's cool. Rogan was definitely on to a lot more stuff back in the day. I feel like he got reined in or toned down at some point, where they're like,
he has to bring everyone else along with, like, he has to bring the audience up to the point instead of being like he's already been there, done that, right? Because I remember, who was it? Kevin Booth, American Drug War. He used to be Bill Hicks's manager. It was like on Rogan's site, you could get the Bill Hicks and Kevin Booth and all those dudes who knew each other. Alex Jones, it was all connected together right there. I remember going to Kevin Booth's website, and I looked at his t-shirts, and he had one that was a psilocybin molecule. And then it said squeegee your third eye. And then it had like the chemical symbols for it. And so I bought one of those. I still have it someplace. It needs to be reprinted though. It's an old t-shirt.
He says some very fascinating people on, like, I mean, he's always says, but to Jeremy's point, I mean, obviously being on Spotify now, having the notoriety he does, because he started out talking about mushrooms. I mean, a lot of it was like DMT, mushrooms, aliens, DMT, this crazy out there stuff, because he was interested in that type of, it started out in like a room in his house with his friends talking. He's about MMA, psychedelics, and sort of alien type of
just conspiracy stuff back in the day, those first 100 shows or so that they did.
I was trying to think of that theory. Christopher Dunn, I think, was the name of the theory. He came up with some sort of chemical theory for the power plant, the pyramids potentially being power plants or something, and having some sort of resonant
the Giza power plant. It was called. Yeah,
that's it. Yeah, it was based on some sort of chemical.
Does have those aqueducty type things underneath, like. The understanding of how they're built is still not explained today.
There's a whole legend where Tesla supposedly visited. I've been trying to find.
It's a Stargate.
That he supposedly visited the pyramids, and he's had this aha moment, and then came back and started construction on the Wardenclyffe Tower, because you look at the Wardenclyffe Tower.
It connects because
it has the same sort of aqueducts underneath, creating this sort of static charge at the top and having sort of like resonant transformative effects with the ionosphere, and it doesn't violate, as far as I understand, any laws of physics, or at least thermodynamics. They're just transforming power that exists around in the upper layers of the atmosphere, where charged particles exist, what we call the ionosphere, which is probably coming from the solar wind to some degree or something like that. So anyways,
right, that Schumann resonances, or the natural earth resonances and currents and stuff. There's some interesting stuff there. There's a company that's like out in Texas trying to build one of those tower, like Wardenclyffe towers, and doing some beamed energy experiments on commercial viability of the actual technology and stuff. And I think the Navy they actually beamed some energy to a station with microwaves recently, and they did some experiments with that too. So there's stuff going on with this. I
guess the issue is how lossy it would be in regards to transporting energy wirelessly, which you'd have to type.
What happens when you stand in the way of the beam?
That
or the birds that fly in the way.
Yeah. Right. To bring it back to 9/11 real quick, and won't keep you forever, but this is a fantastic conversation. I got one. Well, hopefully this will be the last one. Maybe not. From the gallery. Have you seen some of the new this Rich and I, just to preface this, found this to be either a giant honeypot or a massive red herring, but there was this for those that are embedded in the 9/11 alternative sort of truther community. There were the Kevin Wesley YouTube videos that dropped a couple months ago now, Rich?
When the Russia war started,
right at the day the Ukrainian-Russian war started,
moved in.
And so Tim asked from the community, have you seen those? What do you think of those? Have you to me, it didn't really seem to say much. It seemed to be more occult.
It seemed to me to be a wink and a nod from some of the people who did it, because it's got Anglo-American establishment all over it, and secret weapon systems, and Department of Energy, and nuclear clearances, and a whole bunch of stuff on that dude's YouTube page. But it's all like on the down low, and it's got Easter eggs embedded into it that only like spooks would probably put in there.
Yeah.
I'll have to check this out, because I wasn't even aware of this Kevin Wesley, and I found it on here, and I'll have to go and.
All right, so if you check out, I watched all the YouTube videos that he has.
Yeah.
It has his retirement, so you can get his whole official history and how he's an Anglo-American officer, and he retired in London with the American flag and the British flag behind him. He had a Q clearance, secret weapons, energy clearance, nuclear clearance, experimental aircraft clearance, a whole bunch of ominous things. He's there filming when World Trade Center 2 explodes. And if you listen to the audio around him, it seems kind of scripted. Like, if you're on the project, go stand there that day with your video camera, and we'll use whoever has the best footage and circulate it. But his didn't make the cut. So they waited 20 years, and then he releases it. But at the end, he plays a song as he's showing you other footage, and it's America, God Save Him, or whatever, America the Beautiful, a song that was written and embargoed for 20 years until it was released, just like his footage was. So there's like this kind of like psyop thing embedded at the end of the video that tells you it's a little bit more than maybe it's claiming to be. And for those with ears to hear and eyes to see, you could see maybe it's not just like tourist video like it purports to be.
Again, it'd be great to get this guy on and interview him, because there's a lot of people claiming that he's a real person, but someone's impersonating him with this YouTube account.
It's his personal videos, though. I went through all the videos like those. There's the horned owl predator drone type thing. And if you look that up, Northrop Grumman horned owl or whatever it was, Lockheed, I couldn't, like, it's not easily findable. So it's almost like a not so public aircraft is in one of those videos, or maybe I missearched.
There was also another, like, in that weird sort of Gothic inspired sort of cathedral that under which he was, his retirement ceremony took place in England, by the way, which is strange.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting.
There was there's a poem talks about warping steel or something, or warping, like it's obviously allusions to what happened on 9/11. I'm trying to remember. I talked about this during the town hall, but I've been too tired and I don't remember. I'm trying to find the specific, because in other words, there's Easter eggs all over the place. There's this very strange poem that he takes a picture of in the background of this basement of this church in England. And then there's another situation where he shows, because he was an altitude flight instructor or something like that, or he obviously was
his resume is in there. I found it interesting.
He has this whole altitude chamber thing, and I'm like, what's he alluding to? Is it impossible to bank at the speeds, making those sort of nosedives and then banking to the right or to the left to try to like get in line with the towers, and like what type of forces are involved there? What type of effect does that have on your ability to breathe? I don't, because
at that alleged weird speed stuff, and the banking maneuvers expertly executed within split fractions of seconds of otherwise they would have missed the target, and dealing with the wind speed coming from west to east when you're coming in from the south.
Jonathan Swift, that's what it is.
Jonathan Swift.
That was the poem.
Gulliver's Travels, or the ones where they eat people, where they eat the Irish babies.
There was a video analysis of the last 12 seconds of flight 175 before it hit the buildings, and that showed that the plane made like a single corrective maneuver. Like if you were controlling that, a human pilot, you would have made like a corrective maneuver every like probably 3 per second, several corrective maneuvers. But the plane that hit the South Tower just made like a single jerky kind of like correction and then went right in. It was very mechanical. It looked computer controlled, and with what we know from Aidan Monahan's research, and also what was in that X-Files Lone Gunman episode, why wouldn't they have hijacked these planes and flown them by computer? It just makes the most sense to me.
Well, they have the software. It's like they have the hijacking prevention software. So if the plane gets hijacked, they can take it over remotely and fly it and do whatever they want. So they're no longer, so these things exist at the time, and yet it's the guys at the box cutters, and we got to go get them over there so they don't come over here and get us again. And
right, but we had we had planned for it, and we had the systems in place. They were in place actually on board the aircraft that were hijacked on 9/11. So we had those systems in place. We could have just shut them down and flown those planes from the ground, which is just more remarkable once you learn that, because it's like, oh yeah, they definitely like even L. Paul Bremer says it's really hard because to find terrorists who are willing to do this, because you have to find someone who's willing to die for their country, and that's really hard to do. To someone who's willing to die for this, so that they believe in this so much. Well, if you have this technology, then you don't need that. All you need is a couple patsies that think they're OP4 agents, which is opposition force team. You tell them that they're going to take part in a drill, and they got to hijack the plane as part of a drill, and then the rest falls into place. So it's
sort of a little loose analogy to the first World Trade Center bombing. It's all just
or you get these guys who are like Saudi drug cartel pilots and say, how would you like to fly for a legit airline? Here's a ticket, get on the plane. And during that, even if they did hijack it, Pentagon takes over those hijackings. And so the guys are in there and they're like, sir, we just engaged the takeover system. And then someone comes in and says, okay, everyone get up out of your seats. There's a new team that comes and sits in there when they're not going to land the planes. They're going to drive those planes into the targets. And so there's all sorts of scenarios, and that's right in line with Operation Northwoods from 30 years earlier.
The bigger issue, though, is the impossibility of taking amateur pilots to maneuver the way that to me was always
not only to hijack, but to kill themselves in a very strategic and like world changing way. They didn't crash it into the nuclear facility, which would have been one of the top targets if you're going to do something like that.
Right.
So it was like a theatrical look up here while who knows what was going on.
There's a bunch of weird esoteric. You have the tower.
A lot of Aleister Crowley symbolism in that too.
Yeah, weird. Like it's just a very strange. It's sort of symbolic. Taking down the towers represents symbolic destruction of America's economy and the
Jackin and Boaz.
Joachim and Boaz. Yeah. So there's and then there's It's just weird. It's the whole thing seems to be very ritualistic. Obviously, then there's the put options, there's the financial connections, there's Silverstein, the insurance, there's Kroll, there's Securicom, we talked about AIG, Marsh & McLennan. I mean, the gold.
AMEC Corporation that did the renovations in the Pentagon.
And Bovis. AMEC and Bovis. And Phoenix Construction. Phoenix Construction had roles at Turner both places.
Also. Turner Construction, they're a big...
Well, I always remembered Phoenix because the Pentagon, they broke ground September 11th, 1941. And so 60 years to the day on its birthday, it gets destroyed and then rebuilt like from its ashes with Phoenix Construction. I was just like, some people were loving their symbolism when they're putting these things together. It's entertaining script they got there. Lots of good characters. What were you saying about Bovis? These are the big construction companies that build and also remove the demolition.
And
materials.
You said something about
AMEC
Turner?
was the AMEC. Well, Turner Construction was one of the contractors that I know that had some contracts to do some of the work on those floors in the World Trade Center and stuff. And they have to use union construction for a lot of that. So because it is I don't know what the contracts are, but they have to use union for that type of construction. You can't use outside.
Can't go out. It has to be union.
There's a lot of interesting connections there that could be there. I mean, all the unions are run kind of. It's kind of like a mafia.
It's a mafia. It's like a legalized mafia. And before, in the past, going back to the 40s, 50s, and 60s, it was literally the mafia. I mean, the mafia had pretty much embedded the unions, as well as the FBI and other organizations and plant agents. It's not like everyone was a part of it, but so it sort of like runs as a legal mafia. Of course, the government, you could say, is kind of like
George Bush, the Mafia, and CIA. It's a book. It is.
Teamsters were a famous example of that. The Italian mob and various other mafias were infiltrated. those unions in order to. I mean, there's one of the conspiracies of JFK was associated with the Teamster help supposedly get him elected. It goes back to the bootlegging his father was doing during Prohibition, and so there's all these very strange connections. Then they didn't. Supposedly JFK,
Meyer Lansky and the whole Cuban connection, because the Batista had come in. Batista had been ousted in Cuba, and Fidel Castro had taken over, and he had outlawed the gambling industry, which was a big part. So which is
Godfather too. That's sort of like illusions. That's sort of what they try to point a little bit out there. It's like, these people, they're willing to die for this cause of nationalism.
I got you. Operation Underworld, 1938, the UK starts working with Meyer Lansky and the Jewish Organized Crime Syndicate. And then in 1942, the United States starts doing the same thing.
Yeah, well, they realized that during World War II, there was actually a bombing of a ship that happened in the port, and they were investigating it, and they got nowhere with their investigations until they brought the Mafia guys in. And when the Mafia was able to figure out who was responsible and how it happened within, a couple weeks versus the federal investigations, which were getting nowhere. And so that they basically signed a deal with the Mafia because they realized that we're not going to be able to keep our ports safe without them. And
True that.
They were right.
Yeah, it's part of the MI6 infiltration of America is they start working with organized crime here before we do.
What's sad to say too, there's a reason for that though. It's like they can operate outside the bounds of legislation and bureaucracy.
They already ran a drug monopoly, and America's goody. That's the deal.
There's sort of a paradox there where they're more efficient, even though they're also participating in crime themselves. They can paradoxically also control the ports and also control the security around it, supposedly. It's just weird. I mean, it's nothing.
Supposedly, because if anyone else tries to control it, they make it difficult.
It's almost as if they wanted to be the center of world trade.
Well, it's all just different levels of organized crime, right? We talk on
that's
the
what the Wire
like
taught me.
Family. Yeah, the Wire, exactly. I was talking to my dad today about the Wire.
That goes back to that whole what's the empire that was over there in the Ukraine, the Kazalovs or whatever.
Oh, the Khazars or the Khazars?
Khazars, yeah.
The Khazarian Empire in the 9th through like 13th century or something.
Khazarian Mafia. Apparently, it all goes back to there. It all started out of there and has roots back to that area. In fact, didn't the term deep state came from Turkey originally? I heard it was because they had found some prostitute who was involved with a drug dealer, and then it tied right into like the top people in government, and so they came up with that whole term, the deep state. Apparently, it has some ties to this whole region.
Well, you have to remember the Ottoman Empire, one of the longest lasting empires in history. I mean, centered out of
up until World War I, bro.
Constantinople.
Lawrence of Arabia took care of that.
Right.
I'm sorry, the Balfour Declaration took care of that.
Well, it's like Pico, you had Balfour Declaration, you had the carving up of territory based on resources, thanks to that belligerent hegemony that was World War I, excuse me, and then the British saying, yeah, we don't even own that territory, but we'll give it to you once we win the war. We just got to get America involved. Don't worry, we got the under.
Let us teach you what government is. We give away
called
things that
the
aren't
sinking
ours.
of the Lusitania.
Yeah.
Sink the Lusitania. We'll have the heavy, won't say the word, but the influence of the press that are of a certain predilection, run stories to sort of galvanize sentiment within the American public to get them to go to World War, to embrace the concept for war. And we send one of the
it's all about world domination, Tony. They have the best interest at heart.
Greater good, in other words. And that ties back to 9/11. So good.
Yeah. This journalist Hugh Roberts has described the shady nexus between the police and intelligence services, claiming certain politicians and organized crime whose members believe they are authorized to get up to all sorts of unavowable things because they are the custodians of the higher interest of the nation.
Yeah,
that's about it. That's it.
It's like that movie. There's a cop movie from 2015 called war on everyone, or at war on everyone, something like that, war with everybody. The attitude of the two policemen in that movie is pretty much the attitude of the globalists. Like, they have authority so they can like corrupt and not like keep justice, you know?
Yeah.
They use the artificial sense of authority in order to bolster their own positions and make it seem like there's checks and balances when in fact they operate outside the law.
Yeah.
And they
That's
set up
the 25
in order to fall
version.
down. Yeah, exactly. It's the elevator.
I gave you the
pitch
nickel version. Tony gave you the 25-cent version. He's pretty fancy. He's like 2 bits. Here you go. There you go.
So Jeremy, what's
crazy that they're fighting over all these resources? Apparently it's all for resources at the end of the day and control over those resources. But man, they're also hoarding the technology that could,
liberate us all.
Liberate us all. And it's just,
that's right.
Just
they're kind of dicks.
One of the big problems with, like, not talking about the more out there types of free energy or cheaper energy out and cleaner energy solutions that obviously we could invest in and explore, is also the way we set up the sort of con game of crony capitalism, fascism, really worldwide. So there's all these embedded infrastructures and institutions and infrastructure in place, and it would the argument from the which I don't agree with, but they would say is like, well, it caused such destabilization from a world economic standpoint to bring out a technology that could not only maybe revolutionize our understanding of physics, but then potentially overdo all the key infrastructure that is tied to every main institution, the way we run all of world supply chains, that it would cause such an intense destabilization that adopting it would, which I don't see how that argument doesn't hold up the water to me, because yes, on one level, that's true, because then people would argue to cause like World War III and attendant famines and destabilization of the supply chain and all this stuff. It's sort of like that movie First Contact, the old Star Trek movie from the 90s, where they invent warp drive, right?
In the year
it was after
2063.
I
think it was April 4th, 2063.
After the world had gone to war, and there was only like tribes left in America, and most of the world had been destroyed, but new technology had emerged, and there's like a rogue scientist engineer, develops the warp drive or whatever.
When in reality, Elon Musk claims he just did.
But the point is that they're trying to insinuate through an artistic representation that only can take place in a society that already is sort of destabilized to the point where we'd be willing to or could accept the new technology. It's like the new technologies that came in after World War II, like microwave technologies or something like that. And
Global Union.
To me, it just seems like an argument to try to maintain the status quo rather than accept the idea that we can peacefully initiate and implement technologies that could really truly change the world and better the human condition in a way that would be mind-boggling, I think, for most people to even consider the potential possibility. But when I woke up, I considered that if we were to change this game, it would have to be through physics and new technologies that would be able to create decentralize the power structure. And that starts with energy. What's the first thing I need to run my
starts
home?
With taking our energy back and understanding.
And energy can be used metaphorically and literally in that.
Yeah.
Anyways, I'm diatribing, but I hope that.
It's cool stuff to talk about, and I guess I'm glad we're all on the same page with it. So yeah.
I feel like we just scratched the surface, but it's like almost 1:00 in the morning already. I want to thank you for carving out time and investing, not only with us, but we're sharing it with an audience out there of people who are nerdy too. So where can people catch up with you and keep up with you? And what would you like to plug or promote or tell the future?
Well, just definitely check out my YouTube channel, Alien Scientist on YouTube. Subscribe to me there and keep an eye out for our, the conferences that we hold talking about these types of technologies and trying to get a platform where scientists can come out of the woodwork and speak openly to their peers and about these things, so that if there is technologies that they want to disclose or declassify, this is a place to do that. And we're trying to encourage free energy, warp drive technology, any kind of thing like that exists out there. we try to have a place for people to come out and talk about that. So that's altpropulsion.com is the website for that conference that's run by Tim Ventura and Mark Sokol and several others of who are collaborating on that effort. And so it's basically it's scientific disclosure. We're trying to bring a lot of different new ideas out of the woodwork in terms of these mostly propulsion technologies right now, but I want to branch out into more cold fusion and free energy kind of stuff. Real solutions for the problems that we're facing globally now. Also, for my 9/11 stuff, I have a page on Facebook called 9/11 Inside Out, where I have a lot of all my documentaries and other stuff posted, a lot of other articles and related source information. Anytime I come across anything that's related to that core group of suspects or the 9/11 investigation, I'll probably have it posted there. I also had a website, but I just don't have time to keep up with the hosting and the editing and everything else. So it gets hard these days, but definitely check that out. Richard Gage has got that new Richard Gage Unleashed 9/11. He's kicking some serious butt. Check out what he's doing with that initiative. We also didn't even get into the whole NIST lawsuit. They're suing NIST to try to get them to correct things and with their investigations and reports. So that's some groundbreaking stuff. It could potentially go somewhere as far as accountability for 9/11 and truth and justice. So definitely check that out. And I encourage people to get more involved themselves with just the dissemination of information. Man, people are ready for this stuff now. After COVID, people are like wide awake and they're super receptive to the information now, like they've never been in history before. So now is the time where you may be like, I know I've gotten a lot of burnout when I was seeing 9/11 stuff. I don't even look at it anymore if it comes across my news feed, because it's just like, no, I'm just burned out on this. Like, and now's the time not to be burned out. Now's the time to reignite your fire and get back in the game, because we're closer than ever. And something's about to break. It's about to give. And you think that we're there. We're only just beginning, man. Our time's coming, and it's great that to see all the people in this community have just come full circle and coming together. And you guys inviting me on the show is great, because I've looked up to you and your work, your books, everything you've done with tragedy and hope, and over the years I followed your work too, Richard. So you've been a silent inspiration to me as well as many others, I'm sure. So
well, I appreciate the kind words, man. Yeah, you do likewise. And we should have another I'll come up with like some aspects, but I'd like to talk next time about, like, when we have a conversation about 9/11, how does one put evidence on the table to say such and such took place, right? So like when people would say, well, the planes did this, I'm like, well, what planes?
Yeah,
rules of evidence, methods of identification for these various things.
Right.
How can we be certain of chain of custody or, time in service of the airlines, these sort of things, right? So it's in those details that I think people start to get like a much bigger perspective on what's going on. And there's a whole bunch more to talk about. So we don't have to do it all tonight. We got it started. And
well, I just want to thank you for your work, Jeremy. I'm going to have to get back into it. I've fallen off the wayside a bit. I'm big into philosophy, but I started out in alternative technology and alternative physics and these sorts of ideas. And your channel was probably one of the most, if not the most important I discovered in regards to considering the true possibility behind it, but again, grounding it in reality. So I want to really pick that back up and reconsider that. So I really appreciate you throwing out those resources. I'm definitely going to check that out and get sort of re-involved with a lot of that work. So
yeah, for anyone
problem
watching
now,
go ahead.
Sorry, it's just so much. Some of those we're trying to cut down on the length of the content, because we've given presenters like an hour to present and then an hour of Q&A, and 2 hours. No, who has time to sit there and watch 2 hours in these days? So there's got to be a lot of work that needs to be done on condensing that sort of stuff down and really taking out the gems, because there's a lot of dense information in there when you start diving into like the technologies and all that kind of stuff. So
right.
Yeah, and for anyone who's watching, if you do go watch Richard Gage's interview with Jeremy, what I can promise you is at the end, not only just Jeremy show you all these things, he connects them together, and then he's like, to do this, these people could have had command and control, and he's already made the case for it. So he summarizes, and when it's like more plausible that these guys did it than those hijackers that everyone thinks did it, you have to weigh that and consider it. And it's not conspiracy theory, it's facts that exist that may or may not be connected together. And the only way we're going to find out, connected together correctly, accurately, efficiently, is to talk and to have discussions and to figure out what we know about in, getting wrong. And, I found those couple of things that's like the most minute details in your presentation, but it's like, it's worth mentioning it to Mod Salam so that in the future, you don't, say Ramzi Youssef, right? And then you make such offerings to me, and I'm like, oh, thank you. I didn't know that. I appreciate that. And I think that's how we find the truth eventually, is by us learning to grow together in the right direction and not be like at odds. Like
no one's smarter than all of us together,
right,
as a team. I think you said that before, and it really resonated with me, because together we can collectively be so intelligent that we're coming up with things. That's what we try to do with the scientific community, but bringing all the smartest people together in the same room to try to hash this out. And then we say, well, if you got better ideas, then come and present, and then that sort of puts other people up to the challenge and brings smarter people to the table, which is a benefit for all of us.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, we'll let you get back to probably getting rest at this point, and have a productive week. Thank you. And I'll send you a link when we clip out the interview. We'll probably publish it like Thursday, Friday this week. You can share it with your audience and let them see all your fine work being appreciated.
Awesome work.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Jeremy.
Yeah, thanks. We'll have to do this again.
Yeah, right on.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And are you on the East Coast?
Questions. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm in Rhode Island.
Oh, I'm in Connecticut, dude. We should hang out this summer. We should
definitely.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Heck yeah.
I'll have to come up then.
Yeah, Tony, get up here with that new computer. And,
I'm going down to Pennsylvania next week for MUFON. So
I live in Pennsylvania. That's ironic.
Yeah, he lives in right outside that place where they're going to have the MUFON probably.
Well, MUFON PA, go check it out. If you want to meet up with me, I'll be there.
Very cool.
All right, right on. You have a good night, and we'll catch up with you again soon. And thank you for all the research and studious academic work over the years on the variety of topics that you've touched upon with your research.
Yeah, awesome work.
Thank you. Have a great night.
You too, man. Peace.
Have a good night.
What makes the Grand Theft World podcast unique, invigorating, exciting, and informative? Most other podcasts out there are either doing straight up interviews or they're just covering the daily news. They're covering current events from the day they happened. And that is effective. It's useful. It's a great starting point. And then sometimes these current events change during the week past the first story. So we like to give it a little time. You have to wait till some of the dust settles on these stories in order to give them accurate coverage. And the other thing that's really missing in the media landscape is covering the articles that are coming out every day. That's great. That's necessary. But who's bringing in contextual history so that you can understand what has been going on for decades and decades to lead up to the machinations and actions that we see unfolding today? So what we do here on the podcast is we cover current events. Many of these things are censored, but we wait about a week. As a forensic historian, I focused mainly through my career on the history of globalism and collectivism and things that they call maybe the New World Order. There's a lot of facts to these sort of circumstances, groups, events, activities, working groups that they've had over time. So for Grand Theft World listeners, we not only break down the current events, most of which that are censored during the week, we provide you with contextual history, we give you the source notes, the references, we do deep dives, and this really empowers you with an understanding of context and history so that you can make more informed decisions in your life. There's also a community, a membership where you guys can actually ask questions and we can get into the show and share evidence. And there's a town hall weekly for Grand Theft World for those who listen to it and are interested in covering the stories that we don't get to during a 6-hour show. Listening to it an hour a day, you could easily consume the week's news, but you're going to have substance and meaning and context and understanding. And with that, you can make higher quality decisions in your life. So if you're interested in more quality in your life, go to grandtheftworld.com, click podcast at the top, and we'll see you there. Thank you.
These allegations are false.
This isn't Grand Theft Auto, folks. This isn't a video game.
What are the most surprising things that you discovered once you started pulling on that thread? Who he was connected to, what institutions he was influential over, what events he participated in?
Come on, man. What are we talking about? Come on, man. No.
You don't have to think about it, dude.
I got this quote because you said you didn't know much about Klaus Schwab. I made it my job to, as soon as this happened, I'm like, okay, this guy's their front man. Let me learn about the official history of the World Economic Forum. I got their 40-year history. I got every book that Klaus Schwab has written or ghostwritten. I went through those books. This is one of the most interesting passages.
Come on, man. Come on.